She slid the papers across the marble table like they were nothing. Not Tae-ryeon, his mother. Kwon Seon-hwa placed the divorce documents in front of her own son's wife with the same expression she used when dismissing house staff patient, rehearsed, and completely without remorse. The fertility report sat on top, already highlighted. Already annotated in red ink by a Dr. Imani, had never met before that appointment and would never see again. "You cannot give this family what it needs," Seon-hwa said. "You never could." Imani looked at the papers, then at the woman across from her, then at her husband Tae-ryeon, standing near the window with his back half turned, jaw tight, not looking at either of them. That was the moment. Not the papers, not the diagnosis. The window. The fact that the man she had followed to the other side of the world couldn't bring himself to face her while his mother ended her marriage for him. If that had been you, your husband, your mother-in-law, that marble table, what would you have done? Would you have screamed, begged, thrown those papers across the room? Imani Bellamy did none of those things. She picked up the pen. And if you want to know what happened 5 years later, when she walked back into Korea, carrying 4 sons who had their father's eyes, then stay right here. Because this story is going to take everything you thought you knew about love, betrayal, and what a woman is truly capable of, and it's going to burn it down to the foundation. Subscribe to this channel right now so you don't miss a single chapter. Hit that like button and drop a comment below with your city and country. I want to see how far this story travels. Because what Imani Bellamy built in the ashes of that marriage, nobody saw it coming. Not even her. Now let's go back to the beginning. Busan had a way of making everything feel permanent. The city pressed against the coastline, like it was daring the sea to push back all concrete and neon and shipping containers. Stacked 40 feet high along the harbor, the smell of salt cutting through diesel exhaust and grilled meat from the pojang matcha stalls that stayed open past midnight. It was not a gentle city. It was a city that moved and smelled and sounded like something industrial, even when it was being beautiful. And Imani had loved it from the first week. She arrived at 24 years old with a backpack, a graduate school acceptance letter, a sound like green wood splitting, and approximately $400 in a checking account that her mother had made her promise not to touch unless she was bleeding. She had touched it by month 2, but she had also met Kwon Tae-ryeon by month 3, and that changed the arithmetic of everything. He wasn't supposed to talk to her. That was the first thing she understood about him, not that he was dangerous. Not that his name moved through certain conversations in lowered voices, but that he operated according to a set of rules that most people around him followed without being told. He sat at a corner table in a restaurant near Hyundai Beach that her classmate had taken her to for her birthday, and he didn't look at her when she walked past. He didn't look at anyone. He was the kind of man who had learned early that looking at people gave them the impression they mattered, and he had become very selective about who he allowed to matter. But Imani knocked over his water glass when she pulled out the chair behind him. She caught it before it hit the floor. He turned around. She was already apologizing in fragmented Korean, her accent bending the words into shapes a native speaker would wince at, and something in his expression shifted, not warmth exactly, but something adjacent to it. Something that said he had not expected that particular sequence of events from that particular person. "Your Korean is terrible," he said in English. "Your water glass was in my way," she said back. He almost smiled. She would spend the next year learning that almost smile and cataloging its variations the way a scientist catalogs the behavior of something that shouldn't exist. They talked for 3 hours that night. She did most of the talking, the way she always did when she was nervous, filling silence with observations and half-finished theories about the intersection of beauty industry economics and diaspora identity, which was the subject of the research she was quietly conducting for her dissertation. He asked exactly 4 questions the entire conversation. Each one cut straight to the center of something she'd been circling around for 20 minutes. She went home thinking, that man is either very intelligent or very patient. Possibly both. Either way, dangerous. She was right on all 3 counts. What she didn't understand yet, what took her 2 more years to fully absorb, was that Tae-ryeon was dangerous, the way a controlled demolition is dangerous. Precise, intentional, and never ever aimed at anything without a reason. He called her 2 days later. She didn't ask how he got her number. In Busan, in his world, the answer would have been both simple and unsettling, and she was already compromised enough to decide she didn't want to know. Their courtship, if you could call it that, moved slowly and then all at once. Months of dinners, of him asking her to explain American idioms, and her asking him to translate song lyrics she heard on the radio, of long drives along the coastal highway, with the windows down and the sea on their left, and neither of them saying anything that needed to be said, because somehow the silence already said it. She met Daeshik, his uncle, before she met anyone else in the family, a sharp-faced man in his 50s who watched her with the analytical patience of someone who had spent decades assessing risk, and who eventually told her, in very careful English, that his nephew had never brought a woman to meet him before. She didn't meet Seon-hwa for another 6 months. She should have paid closer attention to that timeline. Kwon Seon-hwa was 71 years old and built like something carved from the same geology as the Cold Korean's tone-hard edges worn smooth by time, immovable beneath any amount of pressure, applied from the wrong direction, capable of breaking things that weren't careful. She received Imani's in a receiving room that felt more like a formal inspection than a visit, and she spoke to her son about Imani in Korean, while Imani sat there with her hands folded in her lap, understanding approximately 40% of what was being said and reading the rest from the geometry of Seon-hwa's posture. What she understood, she was being measured, against a standard she had not been told existed, for a role she had not applied for. What she read from the posture, she had already failed. But Tae-ryeon proposed 8 months later in the same restaurant where she'd knocked over his water glass, and Imani said yes before he finished the sentence. And for 2 years after the wedding, she convinced herself that love was enough to sand down the edges of everything that didn't fit. Love was enough for a long time. That was the honest truth, and she'd die before she denied it. Their marriage was not easy, and it was not gentle, and it was not the kind of thing that looked perfect from the outside. Tae-ryeon worked hours that made no structural sense, disappeared into meetings she wasn't allowed to ask about, carried a weight on his shoulders that she'd feel when she put her hands on him at night, but that he would never fully set down in front of her. She understood, on a practical level, the shape of the world he moved through. She was not naive. She had chosen him with both eyes open, told herself she could live alongside his life without being consumed by it. And mostly she was right. But the children question was always there. Sitting between them at dinner, sitting in the space that Seon-hwa carved out every time she called, every time she visited, every time she managed to steer conversation toward dynasty and bloodline and the responsibilities of a Kwon wife. Imani and Tae-ryeon tried for 3 years. The trying became its own kind of grief, structured and scheduled and stripped of everything spontaneous, turning something that should have been intimate into something clinical and exhausting. She watched him try to hide his disappointment. She watched herself try to hide how much his hidden disappointment hurt her. Splitting. They were both performing a version of okayness for each other that neither of them entirely believed, and the performance took energy they didn't always have to spare. When the fertility specialist's office called to schedule a consultation, she went alone because Tae-ryeon had a conflict he couldn't reschedule. She sat in that clean white office and listened to a doctor she'd never met before explain her diagnosis using diagrams and terminology that she copied into her phone's notes app so she could look it up later. Permanently infertile, primary ovarian insufficiency. Confirmed through blood work and imaging conducted at the clinic over 3 prior visits she had no memory of making. She told the doctor she had never been to that clinic before. He showed her records with her name and signature on them. She went home. She sat in the apartment for 4 hours before Tae-ryeon came back. When he walked through the door, she told him what the doctor had said, and she watched the thing happen to his face, not grief, or not only grief, but something more complicated. Something that involved grief and mathematics and the future all at once. That night he held her for a long time without saying anything. 3 weeks later, his mother called. Imani wasn't supposed to hear the conversation, but the apartment's walls were not as thick as the Kwan family's confidence in their own privacy, and she heard enough. She heard Seonhwa's voice, composed and low, laying out the argument the way you lay out evidence. Bloodline, legacy, succession, the syndicate's internal politics. Rival factions who were already watching. The names of men who would use any sign of weakness, any uncertainty about the Kwan line's continuation as leverage against Tae-ryeon's authority. She heard Tae-ryeon say very little. She heard what that silence meant. He didn't bring up divorce for 2 more months. She understood later that he spent those months trying to find another answer and failing, which should have meant something, which she supposed did mean something, only not enough. He cooked for her during that time, more than he ever had. He made the coffee the way she liked it every morning without being asked. He drove her to her business meetings and waited in the car rather than sending a driver. Small acts of care that she recognized in retrospect as the behavior of a man preparing himself for something terrible by trying to be kind first. The night he finally slid the papers across the table, his mother was present. That was what Imani had never been able to fully explain to people who asked about it later. Not that he'd asked for a divorce, not the humiliation of the infertility diagnosis, not even the fact that 5 years of marriage was being dissolved over a medical record she'd had no involvement in creating. What she couldn't explain was that Seonhwa was sitting there, in her own home, at her own table, while her own husband pushed papers across the marble toward her and said, in the voice he used for business, "My family needs an heir." Like she was a contractual party. Like she was a vendor who'd failed to deliver. She picked up the pen. She didn't look at him when she signed. She had prepared herself to look at him, had planned it as a form of defiance, make him see exactly what he was doing. When the moment came, she found she didn't want to. She didn't want his face to be the last thing she memorized in that room. She wanted to remember the table, the pen, the weight of her own hand moving across paper, the specific quality of the silence in that apartment when both of them had stopped pretending. She placed her wedding ring on top of the documents. She said nothing to Seonhwa. She walked to the bedroom, picked up the bag she had quietly packed 3 days earlier because some part of her had already known, and she left. Outside the building, the rain had started without her noticing. Busan rain came in hard, the kind that meant business, sheeting down off the coastal hills and turning the streets into something that moved. Imani stood under the building's overhang for exactly 60 seconds, long enough to understand that she had nowhere to go that night and that the Kwan family driver she had been using for 2 years was no longer, technically, her driver. She started walking. She made it 4 blocks before her legs stopped cooperating. She was sitting on the wet steps of a convenience store, rain cutting off at the edge of the awning in a solid curtain, when the dizziness hit her hard enough that she put her head between her knees and stayed there until a woman from inside the store came out and asked her something in Korean she couldn't quite parse. The ambulance arrived 11 minutes later. She woke up in Busan General Hospital in a bed with paper-thin blankets and fluorescent lighting that had no interest in being kind to anyone, and there was a nurse taking her blood pressure and asking her name in careful English. "Imani Bellamy," she said, and then caught herself, and then said it again more quietly. Imani Bellamy, because that was her name again now. Just hers. The doctor came in 40 minutes later. Young, precise, with the energy of someone who had been on shift for too many hours and was surviving on professionalism alone. He explained what the initial blood panel had shown, confirmed it with a portable ultrasound that he rolled to her bedside, and then turned the monitor so she could see. She looked at the screen. She looked at his face. She looked at the screen again. "That's 4, the doctor confirmed. Quadruplets. Approximately 9 weeks along." He paused, and something in his manner shifted toward careful. "I understand this may be complex news, given what you've been through. If you need time, I'm not infertile," she said. He hesitated. "No, you're not. Your levels are entirely normal. More than normal, actually." She lay there looking at the ceiling for a very long time. 4 lives, growing inside her, in a city she was about to leave forever. With paperwork in a penthouse apartment proving that the man who'd put them there had already decided she wasn't worth keeping. The irony was so enormous that it crossed the border into something else. Something that wasn't funny, and wasn't tragic, and wasn't anything she had a word for, in either English or her limited Korean, just a vast, quiet reckoning with the fact that the universe had a timing problem. She made 2 decisions in that hospital bed, in the gray pre-dawn light of a Busan morning. The first, she was keeping all 4 of them. The second, Tae-ryeon would not know. Not because she wanted to punish him, though she was not going to pretend punishment wasn't somewhere in the equation, but because she had watched, across 5 years and one very long, terrible evening, exactly what happened to people in that family's orbit who were valued primarily for what they could produce. She had watched the mathematics of legacy override everything human, and she was not putting her children inside that system. Not before they existed as people, and not after. She called her mother from that hospital bed at 4 in the morning Atlanta time. A sound like green wood splitting. Her mother picked up on the second ring, which told Imani that she had been sleeping lightly, which told Imani that her mother had suspected something was wrong before Imani had admitted it to herself. "Baby," her mother said. "Mom." Her voice broke on the second syllable. "Just the one." She pulled it back. "I need to come home." "Then come home." "I'm pregnant." Silence on the line. "Then how many?" Imani almost laughed. "What kind of question is?" "Imani Celestine Bellamy." "How many?" She closed her eyes. The silence this time lasted longer. Then her mother exhaled, long and slow, and said, "Lord have mercy." "Mom, he doesn't know. He can't know. I need you to understand that I need you to." "I understand." Her mother's voice went steady, the way it always did when she shifted from reaction into action. "You come home. We'll figure out the rest. You come home first." She left Busan 17 days later. She did not say goodbye to anyone from the Kwon family. She did not contact Tae-ryeon. She arranged everything through her own accounts, her own resources, the professional contact she'd built entirely independent of the life she was leaving behind. On the plane, she sat in economy because her credit card was in her name alone, and she was going to be careful with money now. She was going to have to be, and she pressed her palm flat against her stomach and looked out the window at Korea, getting smaller beneath the clouds. She had arrived here carrying a backpack and an acceptance letter and $400. She was leaving carrying 4. What she was going to build with that, what she was going to build from nothing, in her parents' house, in the city she grew up in, with a body that was about to get very large, and a bank account that was about to get very small, she didn't know yet. She couldn't see the shape of it. She just knew it was going to be hers. All of it on her terms. And the man she had loved, the man she had followed to the other side of the world, the man who had let his mother sit in the room while he ended their marriage, he was going to live the rest of his life, never knowing what he gave away. That was the plan. It held for exactly 5 years. Until the night 4 boys, with their father's eyes, ran loose in a hotel corridor in Busan, and the past came back like something that had never agreed to stay buried in the first place. 5 years. That was the number Tae-ryeon kept returning to as he stood in that corridor with 4 small boys staring up at him and the sound of his own heartbeat doing something it had no business doing inside a chest that was supposed to be armored against this kind of thing. 5 years since he'd signed the papers. 5 years since he'd watched Imani walk out of that apartment without looking back. 5 years of telling himself it had been the right decision, the necessary decision, the decision a man in his position had to make when sentiment and duty pulled in opposite directions, and something had to give. 5 years of being wrong. He didn't know that yet. Not fully. But something in the architecture of the moment. 4 faces tilted up at him, 4 pairs of eyes that carried geometries he recognized from his own reflection, was already doing the structural work of dismantling everything he thought he knew. The tallest boy recovered first. He was watching Tae-ryeon with the particular stillness of a child who had learned to read adult faces the way other children read picture books carefully, looking for information hidden between expressions. He had his mother's cheekbones. He had something else around the eyes that Tae-ryeon's mind skidded away from examining too directly. "You work at this hotel?" the boy asked. "No," Tae-ryeon said. "Then why are you in the hallway?" "Micah." One of the others, shorter, with a gap between teeth and an expression of permanent amusement, tugged at the first boy's sleeve. You can't just ask people why they're in hallways. Why not? Because it's rude. It's a reasonable question. It's still rude. Tae-ryeon looked between them. The easy rhythm of their argument, the lack of any real heat in it, this was old ground for them. They'd had this exact argument, or one shaped like it, many times before. He could see it in the way neither of them was actually looking at the other while they spoke. They were both still watching him. The third boy was hanging back slightly. Same height as the gap-toothed one, but built differently, wider in the shoulders. Something in his posture that suggested he was the one who acted before thinking and had the scrapes to prove it. He was looking at Tae-ryeon with an evaluating directness that felt almost aggressive. The fourth one had drifted toward the wall and was doing something that took Tae-ryeon a moment to identify. He was running his finger along the decorative molding, tracing the pattern, not anxious, just elsewhere. Present in the body but occupied somewhere internal. 4 boys, all approximately the same age, which meant he stopped that math before it finished itself. "What are your names?" he asked, and his voice came out steadier than he deserved. Micah answered for all of them without appearing to consult anyone. Micah Ellis Jordan and Caleb. He pointed to himself, the gap-toothed one, the wide-shouldered one, and the boy at the wall, in that order. Bellamy, all of us. Bellamy. She'd gone back to her name. Of course she had. How old are you? The question was out of his mouth before he'd made a decision to ask it, which was not how he operated. He made decisions. He did not let his mouth run ahead of them. Micah looked at him with the particular patience of a child who had answered this question 10,000 times and found it neither interesting nor offensive. 5. All of us. We're not identical. People always think we are, but we're not. You can tell if you look. I can tell, Tae-ryeon said. Something in his tone made Micah recalibrate slightly. The boy's eyes moved across Tae-ryeon's face with more attention than a 5-year-old had any business deploying, and whatever he found there made him go quiet in a way that felt like a decision rather than a lapse. "Where's your father?" Tae-ryeon asked. The silence that followed had a shape to it. The 4 boys exchanged something, not a look exactly, more like a frequency shift, a shared adjustment. The question had landed in territory they knew. It was Ellis who answered, the gap-toothed one, the easy one. But he wasn't easy when he answered this. His voice stayed light, but his eyes didn't. He lives somewhere in Korea, but we've never met him. The corridor was very quiet. Tae-ryeon heard the blood in his own ears. He was still crouched at their level. He'd gone down to one knee when he caught them, instinct, and hadn't straightened up since, and now he was looking at Ellis with the full weight of a comprehension he was not ready to carry, and could not put down. Korea. The boy said his father lived somewhere in Korea. And then, from somewhere behind him, from the direction of the elevators, a voice. Boys. He knew that voice. He had last heard it, saying nothing, signing papers in silence, setting a ring on marble, walking away, but he knew every variation of it the way you know music you learned, before you knew you were learning anything. It lived in a part of him that had nothing to do with decisions or mathematics or duty. He stood up. He turned around. Imani Bellamy was standing 30 feet away, near the elevator bank, dressed in something dark and professional, her hair pulled back, her phone in her hand. She looked like someone who had built herself from scratch and was comfortable in the result, no residue of the girl he'd met in that restaurant, no trace of the woman who'd sat across from him at that marble table. She was something else now, someone else. Someone who had a company with her name on it and an international award she'd flown to Korea to collect, and 4 sons who said their father lived somewhere in Korea, but they'd never met him. She saw him. The moment she processed who she was looking at, her face did something very small and very fast that she shut down almost immediately. He caught it anyway. He'd had years of practice reading things. People were trying not to show. "Boys," she said again, steadier, and the 4 of them turned toward her. "Come here." They moved toward her, without resistance, the way children move toward the fixed point of a parent automatically, gravity pulled. Caleb drifted away from the wall. Jordan broke away from whatever calculation he'd been running. Ellis went first. Micah last, still looking at Tae-ryeon over his shoulder. She gathered them around her without touching him, without addressing him. She checked them over the way parents do inventory, confirmation of wholeness, and then she looked at Tae-ryeon with an expression so professionally neutral that it had to have cost her something to assemble it. Tae-ryeon, just his name, no honorific, no warmth. No anger either. Just identification, Imani, he said. She nodded once. Short. Final. I hope the event tomorrow goes well. She was already turning, already steering the boys toward the elevators, already treating this like a coincidence she could outpace if she moved at the right speed. "They're 5, he said. She stopped. Not dramatically. Not like a woman in a film who stops because the music tells her to. She stopped the way you stop when something physically prevents forward motion. Involuntary, immediate. She turned back. Her face had changed. Not much, but enough. The neutrality had cracked along one specific fault line, and what showed through wasn't anger or grief. It was something more like a person doing rapid internal calculation, trying to determine how much he already knew, and what that number required her to do next. "Yes," she said. "They are. All 4 of them, yes. And their father lives in Korea." The boys were watching. She seemed to weigh this for exactly 2 seconds, then made a decision he could see her make. She looked at Micah directly. "Go press the elevator button. Take your brothers." Micah hesitated. He was 5 years old and already the kind of person who hesitated when instinct said something important was happening, and he might be needed. Imani held his gaze and nodded once. Whatever she communicated in that nod was enough. He took Ellis by the hand and steered his brothers toward the elevator. Imani walked back toward Tae-ryeon, not close. She stopped at a distance that was professional. Negotiating distance, the distance you stand from someone you are prepared to disagree with, formally. "Don't," she said quietly. "Don't what? Don't do the math out loud." "Not here, not with them 10 feet away. I'm not doing anything out loud." "You're doing plenty." Her eyes were steady on his. She wasn't shaking. That was the thing that hit him hardest. She wasn't shaking. V-E. He remembered a woman who cried in the car sometimes when she thought he was asleep, who called her mother when she thought he couldn't hear, who had been trying to hold herself together across 5 years of trying and failing and trying again. This woman in front of him had nothing of that visible exhaustion left. She'd processed it. Put it somewhere it couldn't reach the surface anymore. "I came here for an award. My company earned. We leave tomorrow." "What hotel are you in?" "This one." A pause. "Which I did not know was your venue until we checked in." "We'll be gone by morning." Hotel employees appeared at the far end of the corridor, pushing racks of white floral arrangements. The wedding flowers. For tomorrow. For the ceremony that 200 people were arriving in Busan to attend, that had taken 3 months of his staff's time to coordinate, that Sejin's family had spent considerable money to make appropriate for both families' standings. Imani's eyes went to the flowers, then back to him. Something moved across her face that she didn't bother hiding this time. Not satisfaction, she wasn't that petty, and he knew it. Something quieter, recognition maybe, of the specific irony of the universe's timing. "Congratulations," she said. "Imani, I mean it." And she did. He could hear it. She had moved so far past this that she could mean it. "I hope she's better for you than I was, or that you're better for her than you were for me." She looked at him for one more beat. "We're going to be in our room for the rest of the night." "Don't." She walked to the elevator. The doors were held open by Micah, who had apparently decided the button was best pressed and held in. When his mother stepped inside, the boy looked back at Tae-ryeon, once that same assessing look, direct and uncomfortable, an ancient feeling in a 5-year-old face, and then the doors closed. Tae-ryeon stood corridor for a long time. The hotel employees moved past him with their flower racks, absorbed in logistics, paying him no attention. Someone's radio crackled with catering instructions. The thick carpet absorbed everything: footsteps, voices, the sound of a man standing very still while something shifted in him like tectonic plates. He pulled out his phone. He called Daeshik. His uncle picked up on the 3rd ring with the particular tone of a man who had been expecting a call, but not at this hour. "Nephew, I need you here tonight." A pause. "What happened?" "Come to the hotel. Another pause longer. Then 20 minutes. He put the phone away. He stood there a moment longer looking at the space where the elevator doors had been. 4 boys, 5 years old. Their father lives somewhere in Korea. We've never met him. He walked to the window at the end of the corridor. The harbor was lit up below cargo ships and pleasure boats, and the coastal highway running its long neon spine along the waterfront. He pressed 2 fingers against the glass. He had made many decisions in his life from positions of incomplete information. He had made peace with that necessity. In his world, you did not always have the luxury of full knowledge before you were required to act. You acted on what you had, you absorbed the consequences, and you moved. What he had right now was 4 faces, and a number. 5. Dae-shik arrived in 18 minutes, which meant he'd already been in the building, or very close to it. He was wearing a dark jacket over a white shirt, no tie, and his expression was the one he reserved for situations that required both full attention and practiced calm. He had been Tae-ryeon's father's brother, and Tae-ryeon's closest counsel for 15 years, and he read rooms the way other men read spreadsheets fast, completely, with an eye for what didn't belong. He read Tae-ryeon's face in the corridor and said nothing for a moment. "How many?" he asked finally. Tae-ryeon looked at him. "I know Imani Bellamy is in this hotel," Dae-shik said. "I know who she is now. Bellamy Noir, the award ceremony tomorrow. I knew 3 days ago, and I was deciding whether to tell you before the wedding." He paused. "How many children?" 4. Dae-shik sat down on the window bench, like the number had physically required him to sit. He put his hands on his knees. He looked at the carpet. "Boys or girls?" Boys. A long silence. "How old?" 5. Dae-shik looked up at him. The calculation was the same one Tae-ryeon had done, and it landed the same way on his face, not shock exactly, because Dae-shik had trained the shock out of his reactions decades ago, but something slower and more serious. Something that involved consequence. "Did you talk to her?" "Briefly." "What did she say?" "She said not to." He moved away from the window. He couldn't stand still. He walked to the wall and back, and the movement helped nothing, but he kept doing it. "She said they leave tomorrow." "Tae-ryeon, I need the original records." He stopped walking. "The fertility diagnosis. The clinic where she was told. I need the name of the doctor. I need everything that existed before the divorce. Before the papers. I need to know where those records came from." Dae-shik was very still. "Dae-shik, there is something," his uncle said slowly, "that I have been investigating for the past 3 months. Quietly. It began as a separate matter, a doctor who was found to have accepted payments from a private account connected to family funds." He stopped. "Say the rest." "The account was authorized by your mother." The room got very quiet. "The doctor's name," Tae-ryeon said. "A reproductive specialist at a private clinic in Busan. He resigned 18 months ago. We found him during an audit that had nothing to do with this. Nothing to do with Imani, I want to be clear. I had no idea there was a connection until tonight." Dae-shik stood. "Until you just told me the number 5. Tae-ryeon walked to the door. "Where are you going?" Dae-shik said. "To talk to my mother." "Tae-ryeon. It's after 11 at night. The wedding is tomorrow morning. If you confront her now." "If I don't confront her now," Tae-ryeon said, turning, and his voice had dropped to something very flat and very clear, "then I will spend tomorrow standing next to a woman I'm about to marry, while somewhere in this hotel, a woman who may have been lied out of my life is sleeping in a room with my 4 sons." He held Dae-shik's eyes. "Tell me which of those things is worse." Dae-shik had no answer. He was a man who dealt in practical realities, and the practical reality in front of him had no good options. He pressed his mouth together and nodded once, which meant, "I understand, and I cannot stop you, and I am coming with you." Xianhua had a suite on the 14th floor. She opened the door in a silk robe and house slippers, her white hair down, looking smaller than she did in daylight, the way powerful people often do when caught, without their formal architecture. She looked at Tae-ryeon. She looked at Dae-shik. Her eyes did something very quick and very small. "You need to sleep," she said to Tae-ryeon. "Tomorrow." "The clinic," he said. "The one you sent Imani to. The doctor whose bills you paid." She didn't move from the doorway. "Let us in," he said. "This is not the time. Let us in." She stepped back. The suite was full of wedding arrangements, printed programs on the desk, a garment bag containing tomorrow's dress hanging on the bathroom door, a family photograph positioned on the nightstand with the careful intention of someone who curated their own rouncensings. Tae-ryeon walked to the center of the room and turned around. Was the diagnosis real? He said. Tae-ryeon, yes or no? Seon-chwa stood near the door, with her hands folded in front of her. Her face was doing the thing it always did, when she was deciding how much of the truth was structurally necessary, a kind of stillness that looked like composure, but was actually active calculation. She was not right for this family, she said finally. The words landed like something dropped from a height. That's not what I asked you, Tae-ryeon said. She was never going to fit. She didn't understand our world. She didn't understand what you needed. She didn't understand what the Kwon name requires from. Was the diagnosis real? Seon-hwa looked at her son. Tae-ryeon had seen his mother face down men who frightened professional security teams. He had seen her manage crises that would have broken anyone less structurally rigid. She did not frighten easily, and she did not capitulate easily, and she had never in his memory shown him fear. She showed him something like it now. No, she said. It was not. Daeshik made a sound behind him. Not words. Just breath leaving a body faster than expected. She was fertile, Tae-ryeon said. I could not allow. She was fertile, not a question. Not anymore. And you paid a doctor to tell her she wasn't. You put her in that office. You had someone sign her name to record she'd never seen. And then you sat in my home and put divorce papers on my table. His voice didn't rise. It got quieter, which was worse. You sat in my home while I ended my marriage based on a lie that you manufactured. I did what I had to do to protect this family's. You are not going to say legacy to me right now. The words came out with a precision that made Seon-hwa's sentence. You are not going to use that word in this room tonight. Do you understand me? She closed her mouth. She has 4 sons, he said. 4 sons who are 5 years old. 4 sons who told me tonight that their father lives in Korea and they've never met him. He stopped. He pressed the heel of his hand briefly to his mouth and then dropped it. She raised them alone for 5 years. While I was here being managed by a lie that you built because you didn't want mixed-race grandchildren carrying your precious name. Seon-hwa's chin came up. Even now, even with it laid out plainly, she didn't fully collapse. That was the thing about her. She had convictions that were wrong all the way down to the foundation, and they still held her upright. You needed someone who could don't. His voice cracked on the word. Once, he pulled it back. Don't tell me what I needed. Don't tell me what you did for me. Don't tell me anything right now that requires me to understand your reasoning, because I am telling you plainly that I am not capable of understanding it tonight. He turned away from her. He looked at Daeshik. I need everything you have. Everything from the audit, the doctor's name, the payment records, the dates, all of it. Tonight. Daeshik nodded. And the wedding, Seon-hwa said from behind him. He turned back. One more time. And the look on his face was the one that stopped conversations in rooms full of men who understood what it cost not to back down from that look. There is no wedding, he said. She flinched. It was small. But he saw it. Tae-ryeon. 200 people are arriving tomorrow morning. Sejin's family has the arrangement between our families requires. I said there is no wedding. He walked to the door. This conversation is not finished, but I cannot have the rest of it tonight without doing something I cannot take back. So I am going to leave this room. And tomorrow, after I have spoken to Sejin, we will have the rest of this conversation in front of whoever in this organization needs to hear it. He opened the door. She left Korea, Seon-hwa said. Her voice had gone different. Not soft, she wasn't capable of soft. Not tonight. Maybe not ever, but careful. Strategic. 5 years ago, she chose to leave. Whatever she built it by herself. That was her choice. You cannot? He looked at her over his shoulder. She left, he said, because she had nowhere to stay. She left because you made sure she had nothing to stay for. He paused. And she chose not to tell me about those boys, because she watched what this family does to people who don't fit your definition of legacy. He let that sit for a second. She was protecting them from us. He closed the door. In the hallway, Daeshik fell into step beside him. Neither of them spoke for a long moment. The corridor had the middle-of-the-night stillness that expensive hotels cultivated: thick carpet, low lighting, the muffled distance of the world outside. "She protected them from you too," Daeshik said finally. Gently, with the honesty of a man who knew that right now gentle and honest both needed to be present in the same sentence. Tae-ryeon stopped walking. He stood there. "I know," he said. And that was the weight of it. Not just what his mother had done, though. That was enormous, that was criminal in ways that had nothing to do with the criminal world they operated in, but what he had done. He had received a diagnosis. He had allowed that diagnosis to become the reasoning he needed for a decision he'd been too cowardly to refuse outright. He had let his mother sit in his home, and he had slid those across the table, and he had stood at the window while Imani signed them. No one had put a gun to his head. His mother had handed him an excuse, and he had used it. And 5 years later, 4 boys were sleeping on the floor above him, who had never met their father. He looked down the hallway toward the elevators, toward the floors above. He thought about going up. He thought about knocking on the door of whatever room she was in and just standing there. He didn't know what words he would bring. He didn't know what words existed for this. Sorry was a matchstick held up against a structure fire. Forgive me assumed he deserved to ask. He didn't go up. He wasn't going to do this in the middle of the night. With her in a room she was already planning to leave, with his mother, 40 meters away, and a wedding that 200 people were going to show up for in 8 hours. He was not going to do it wrong again. He had done it wrong before, allowed other people's timing, other people's architecture, to dictate the most important moments of his life, and he was not going to do it again. He would do this right, whatever right looked like now, whatever it cost him. He pulled out his phone and made the call that would begin the dismantling of tomorrow. The line rang once. Sejin picked up. There was a pause on her end, and in that pause he understood that she was not asleep. That she had been awake and waiting in the way that people wait when they have been telling themselves all day that they are at peace with something they are not at peace with. Tae-ryeon, she said, just his name. The same way Imani had said it. "I need to see you tonight," he said. "I'm sorry. I know what time it is." Another pause, longer. "I know," she said quietly. And those 2 words carried inside them everything that had not been said, across 3 months of an arrangement that both families had invested in, and neither party had fully believed in all the careful conversations and strategic dinners.
Public appearances that had been building toward tomorrow morning, toward a ceremony that was going to
ask 2 people to stand in front of 200 witnesses and promise things that at least one of them already knew were beyond his reach. "I'll come down," she said. He waited for her in the hotel lobby, in a chair near the window that looked out over the harbor. The water was still lit. The cargo ships moved with the slow patience of enormous things that had no interest in anyone's emergency. He had 4 sons. He had spent 5 years building an empire for a legacy that was already walking around Atlanta in little shoes, unknowing and unclaimed. He had one night to find a way to say to Sejin what she deserved to hear, and then to find a way to get to Imani before she put his sons on a plane and carried them back across the ocean to a life he had no part in, a life he had forfeited before he even knew it existed. And he had to do both of those things without making promises he hadn't yet earned the right to make, and without frightening her further into a distance she had very good reason to maintain. The elevator opened. Sejin walked toward him. She was dressed simply, her hair loose, without the composure she wore in public. And in her face, in the set of her jaw, and the steadiness of her eyes, he saw something he should have registered months ago, and hadn't. This was a woman who already knew she was standing beside a man whose heart had never fully arrived. She sat down across from him. She looked at him for a long moment. "Tell me," she said. He told her everything. Sejin listened without interrupting. It was the first thing he noticed. She didn't ask questions, didn't interject, didn't fill silence with the nervous sounds people make when they're processing something difficult in real time. She sat across from him in that lobby chair, with her hands folded in her lap, and she listened the way people listen when they already know the shape of what's coming and have spent considerable time making peace with it. He told her about the corridor, the 4 boys, the math. He told her about his mother and the doctor and the audit and the payment records. He told her about Daeshik's voice in that hotel room, saying 3 months quietly, like those words were an apology. He told her about Imani's face when she saw him that single fractured second before the neutrality came back up, like a wall being raised from the inside. He did not tell her everything he felt. Some of it he didn't have language for yet. Some of it was still assembling itself in his chest, into something with recognizable edges. When he finished, Sejin was quiet for a long moment. The harbor through the window behind her was doing what harbors do, at 2 in the morning, moving slowly below, lit indifferent to everything happening on shore. "How long have you known?" she asked finally. "Tonight." Not about the boys. She looked at him steadily. "How long have you known you were never going to be able to do this?" He didn't look away from her. She deserved that much. "Long enough that I should have said it before tonight." She nodded once, not accepting an apology, just acknowledging the truth of what he'd said. "My mother's family is going to be difficult," she said. Her voice was practical, not cold but organized. She was already moving through it, sorting what was manageable from what wasn't. They invested in this arrangement as much as mine did. "You understand what canceling tonight means for our family's relationship. And you're still—" "Yes." She looked at him for a long moment. He waited. He owed her the waiting. "I knew," she said quietly. "Not about the children. But I knew she was. I knew there was something. Someone. I told myself it was history, that it would stay where history stays." A slight pause. "I was being optimistic." "Sejin, don't apologize." She said it without sharpness. "Just directness. An apology right now is just you trying to feel better about something that made me feel worse. And I'm not in the business of managing your guilt at 2 in the morning." He closed his mouth. "I'm going to go back upstairs," she said, standing. "I'm going to call my mother in the morning, and I'm going to tell her that I made the decision. Not you, me." She smoothed the front of her jacket, a small, deliberate gesture, putting things in order from the outside in. "I was always going to be the one who paid the price for whatever happened to this arrangement, so I might as well be the one who controls the narrative." He stood. "I'm sorry. I know you said. I know you are." She looked at him one more time, assessing, honest, with the clear eyes of a woman who had been many things in her life, but was not going to be someone's consolation or prize. "Find your sons, Tae-ryeon. That's the only thing that matters tonight." She walked to the elevator. He watched the doors close. He stood in the lobby for exactly 30 seconds doing nothing, which was 28 seconds longer than he usually allowed himself for anything, and then he pulled out his phone and called Daeshik. "The documents," he said when his uncle answered. "I need them now." Daeshik spread everything across the desk in Tae-ryeon's suite. At 2:47 in the morning, printed pages from the audit, photographed records, payment transfers traced through 3 layers of accounts that had been set up to be difficult to follow and had been followed anyway by a financial investigator Daeshik had hired 6 weeks ago for what he'd described at the time as a routine internal compliance review. Nothing about it had been routine. Tae-ryeon stood over the desk and read. The doctor's name was Park Sung-won. He had operated a private fertility clinic in Gangnam for 11 years before relocating to Busan and then quietly leaving practice entirely 18 months ago. The payments to him from the Kwon family account, routed through a shell company registered to a property management firm that had been dormant for 6 years, totaled 43 million won across 4 transactions over a period of 8 months. The first payment predated Imani's diagnosis by 6 weeks. 6 weeks, which meant the diagnosis had been purchased before she'd ever walked into that office, which meant the appointment had been arranged. The records had been manufactured in advance. The consultation that ended her marriage had been staged by the time she sat down in that chair, and she had walked in there already condemned and not known it. Tae-ryeon put the paper down. He picked it back up. He read the date of the first payment again. She was trying for a year by this point, he said. Not to Daeshik, to himself, working through it out loud, because if he kept it and was going to do something structural to him that he couldn't afford right now. Yes, Daeshik said, anyway. My mother arranged this while Imani was still trying. While we were doing everything the doctors recommended and scheduling appointments, and he stopped. He set the page down with more care than was necessary. She was hopeful. At that point, she was still hopeful. Dae-shik said nothing. My mother arranged this while my wife was still hopeful. The silence in the room was the kind that had weight. Tae-ryeon walked to the window. The city below had gone to its minimum, a few late cars, the harbor lights, the skeleton of commerce running on night crew time. He pressed his forehead briefly against the glass, and then straightened. Is there enough here to prove it, he said. Legally, independently. If I walk this to someone outside our organization, a lawyer, an investigator with no connection to us, is there enough? There's enough, Dae-shik said. The payment trail is clean. The timing is documented. Park Sung-fwon signed records with Imani's name on clinic visits that our investigator has been unable to verify. Actually occurred, we cross-referenced, with her credit card records from that period which we obtained through. He stopped. Through means I'd rather not put in writing. Did she go to that clinic? Not once. Every documented visit is fabricated. The signatures are either forged or obtained separately under false pretenses. He paused. Tae-ryeon, this is medical fraud, criminal fraud, against your wife. Arranged by your mother and conducted by a licensed physician who accepted payment to participate. Tae-ryeon turned from the window. Where is Park Sung-won now? Dae-shik folded his hands on the desk. That's the complication. Something in the phrasing made Tae-ryeon go very still. What complication? He died. 14 months ago. Heart failure, officially. He was 62. Dae-shik met his eyes. He's not available to confirm anything in person. But the records exist. The payments exist. What we don't have is a living witness who participated. What we have is circumstantial, extremely strong. Circumstantial, the kind that would be difficult to explain away, but your mother's defense would be that the payments were for other services, that the clinic records are coincidental. She admitted it, Tae-ryeon said. Tonight, in her room. You were standing there, I was, and I'm a Kwon, and you are a Kwon. In a courtroom, our family's lawyers would argue that a private family conversation conducted under emotional duress in the middle of the night before a canceled wedding is not the same as a formal confession. Tae-ryeon sat down on the edge of the desk. He rubbed his eyes with the heels of his hands. He was tired in a way that had nothing to do with the hour and everything to do with the specific exhaustion of having every assumption you had organized your life around revealed as someone else's construction. She doesn't need a courtroom, he said finally. She needs to face the people in this organization who were told they were serving the Kwon bloodline. The people who enforced my decisions, who stood behind me when I made choices that affected this family based on information she manufactured. He looked at Dae-shik. She needs to say it to them. Dae-shik absorbed this. That will have consequences for her standing. Good. And for yours. They will ask what it means about your judgment. About the years you operated on false premises. Let them ask. He stood. I operated on false premises because I was willing to be managed. That's on me. I'm not hiding from it. He picked up the audit documents and squared them into a stack. Set up a meeting, senior members only. Not tomorrow, I need to find Imani before she leaves. But within the week, Dae-shik nodded slowly. And tonight? Tonight, I'm going to sleep for 2 hours, and then I'm going to figure out what I say to a woman who has every reason to get on that plane and never look back. He didn't sleep. He lay on the bed in his suit and stared at the ceiling and ran through conversations that hadn't happened yet, discarding them one by one for various failures of honesty or adequacy. He thought about Micah at the elevator holding the door. He thought about Ellis saying, their father lives somewhere in Korea, in that light, careful voice, the kind of voice a child uses for a subject they've been taught to hold, without letting it become too heavy. He thought about Caleb, tracing the molding on the wall with his finger, somewhere else, making sense of the world through texture and pattern while his brothers handled the social logistics. He thought about Jordan, wide-shouldered, watchful, evaluating Tae-ryeon with a directness that sat wrong in a 5-year-old face until you recognized it as a mirror. That was Tae-ryeon's own face, the face he made in meetings when he was deciding whether someone across the table was being straight with him. At 5:15 in the morning, he gave up on sleep and went to the window again. At 6:45, he called Imani's room. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. Hotel voicemail. Her voice wasn't on it. He called again at 7. At 7:20, a knock came at his door that he had not been expecting. He opened it. Imani was standing in the hallway. She was dressed for travel dark jacket, bag over her shoulder, her hair down now, no professional armor. She looked like she'd slept badly and had made peace with that. She looked like someone who had decided something in the night and come to deliver it in person, because she was not the kind of woman who delivered important things through voicemail. "The boys are with my colleague down the hall," she said. "I have 30 minutes before we need to leave for the airport." He stepped back from the door. She came in, but not far. She stopped just inside and kept her bag on her shoulder, which told him she was not planning to stay long enough to set it down. He didn't offer her a seat. He understood the geometry of what she was setting up, and he didn't interfere with it. "You called my room twice," she said. "Yes, so I'm here." "Say what you need to say." He looked at her. She was 32 years old, and she had built a company and raised 4 children and come back to the city that had broken her heart to collect an award she'd earned and walked into a corridor full of her own past. And she was standing in front of him with 30 minutes on the clock and her bag still on her shoulder, giving him the space to speak, because she was, underneath everything, still the person she had always been. The one who showed up. The one who didn't make people chase her down for the conversation they owed her. "The diagnosis was false," he said. Her face didn't change. Not in the way he'd expected. "I know," she said. He stopped. She looked at him evenly. "I've known for 2 years." The room did something. The air in it. He felt it like pressure changing. I suspected something was wrong within 6 months of arriving in Atlanta. The pregnancy was completely normal. The delivery was difficult, but the fertility levels, throughout everything the doctors told me, contradicted what the clinic in Busan had documented. She shifted the bag on her shoulder. "A small adjustment. I hired an investigator 2 years ago. She traced the payment records independently. She found Park Sung-won. She found the account." She paused. She interviewed him before he died. The temperature in the room dropped several degrees. He told her, Tae-ryeon said, "Yes," and he stopped himself. "Reorganized. You knew what my mother had done. For 2 years. And you didn't tell you." Her voice was steady. "Yes." He needed a second. He turned away from her briefly, not long, just enough to get his breathing organized, and then he turned back. "Why?" Imani set her bag down. Not because she was staying. He understood. This was a different gesture. She was putting something down, so she could use her hands for what she was about to say. "Because of what would happen if I told you," she said. "Think about it. I tell you that your mother falsified a medical diagnosis to end our marriage. What do you do?" He said nothing. "You were still running the Tae-ryeon syndicate. You were still in that world. You would have come to Atlanta maybe. Or you would have handled your mother, maybe. But either way, my boys would have been pulled into that orbit. Your world. The legal battles. The family politics. The people who were already watching your succession. 4 sons with a Black American mother would have been what? Proof of something? Weapons in someone's internal argument? Leverage for someone who wanted to use your family against you?" She crossed her arms. Not defensive, like she was holding herself together from the outside while she said the hard part. "I watched what that family did to me. I was an adult. I could choose. They are children. They don't get to choose." He let that sit. "You protected them from me," he said. Same thing Daeshik had said. Different weight now. "I protected them from your world," she corrected. "I don't know yet whether that's the same thing." He registered the precision of that distinction. It was important to her. He was going to be careful with it. "I've been dismantling it," he said quietly. "For the past year. The most violent operations I've been pulling out of them. Converting holdings. Moving toward legitimate structure." She looked at him without visible reaction. "I know you have no reason to believe that," he said. "I have some reason," she said, surprising him. "I do my research, Tae-ryeon. I've been watching what the Tae-ryeon syndicate does and doesn't do from Atlanta for 2 years. I've noticed the changes." She looked at him carefully. "I just don't know if they're permanent or strategic." He didn't have an answer for that yet. He thought about whether to pretend otherwise and decided against it. Neither do I yet, but I know what I want them to be. She was quiet for a moment. Why are you telling me about the diagnosis tonight? She said. You could have just let us leave. You found out everything last night. You know I knew. You know you can't undo it. Why come to me now? He looked at her. Because my sons told me last night that they've never met their father, he said. And I'm their father. And I have been absent from their lives for 5 years. Not because I chose to be, I know the argument. I know I did choose it. I'm not hiding from that. But because I didn't know. I didn't know they existed. And now I do. He stopped. Took one breath. And I'm asking you. Not telling you. Not threatening you. Not bringing lawyers. Not using any of the things I could use. Because you know as well as I do that I have resources. And I'm not going to pretend I don't. His voice was raw. I'm asking. Let me know them. Whatever that looks like. Whatever conditions you need. Let me be their father. Imani looked at him for a long time. The morning light was coming through the window. Now actual daylight, gray and coastal. The kind of light that made everything look slightly more real than you'd prefer. I need to ask you something, she said. Ask if I'd never come back to Korea. If that award hadn't been in Busan at that hotel on that night. If those boys had never run into you in that corridor. She held his gaze. Would you have come looking? The question landed exactly where she'd aimed it. In the place where honest answers live, underneath all the rational architecture and justification. He stayed with it. He did not insult her by answering fast. I don't know, he said finally. I want to tell you yes. But I don't know whether I would have, or whether I just want to believe I would have. He paused. What I know is that I spent 5 years believing something that wasn't true, and during 5 years some part of me was looking for the thing that didn't add up. I just wasn't looking in the right place. He stopped again. That's not an answer. I know it's not, but it's what's true. She nodded, once processing it. I have conditions, she said. He waited. No syndicate world. Not around them. Not ever, not their presence at events connected to it. Not their names used in any context connected to it. Not their images anywhere near anything related to your business operations. They are not heirs to anything criminal. Agreed. They stay in Atlanta. Primary residence. You come to them. I will not uproot them from the life I built. Agreed. I make the decisions about their school, their health, their daily lives. You are consulted. You are not in charge. He took a breath. Agreed. If at any point I believe your world is putting them in danger. You pull back, he said, and I won't fight you on it. I mean that. I understand I haven't earned the right to fight you on anything. She looked at him for one more long moment, wherever she was measuring him against whatever internal instrument she was using. He waited for it to finish. I'll tell them tonight, she said, that they met their father, that you're going to be in their lives. She picked her bag back up. The rest we figure out as we go. He nodded. She moved toward the door. Then she stopped. Not completely. Just partial stop, one hand on the doorframe, not quite turning back to face him. And what came out of her when she spoke was not planned. He could hear the difference. It was the thing underneath the conditions and the logistics that she hadn't meant to bring into the room. I used to imagine this conversation, she said. The one where you found out. Where I got to see your face when you understood what you'd lost. She was quiet for a second. I used to think it would feel like something. Like it would be worth something. He didn't move. It doesn't, though, she said. It just feels like something that happened. We're both going to have to live inside now. Her hand dropped from the doorframe. I don't feel victorious, Tae-ryeon. I feel tired. She left. He stood in the empty room and felt the truth of that settle into him like something that planned to stay permanent. The meeting with the senior Tae-ryeon members was set for 4 days later. Those 4 days were the kind that moved like concrete, drying, heavy and slow, and resistant to anything trying to speed them up. Tae-ryeon handled the logistics of the canceled wedding through his assistant, through Daeshik, through the careful management of 200 people's travel arrangements, and the diplomatic mitigation of 2 families' injured expectations. Sejin's father called once. It was a short call. Tae-ryeon told him the truth, not all of it. But enough, and the man on the other end of the line was angry, and then quiet, and then, after a long pause, said something Tae-ryeon hadn't expected. My daughter told me 3 months ago she wasn't sure about this. I didn't listen, they left it there. Seonhwa did not call. He did not call her. He flew to Atlanta on the 3rd day. Not to confront Imani, she'd asked for time to talk to the boys, and he was going to respect the request, though every hour of the flight over the Pacific felt like something he was paying for with actual tissue. He flew to Atlanta because he had told his sons he was their father, and they deserved to see him not disappear. He checked into a hotel 15 minutes from Imani's address. He did not show up unannounced. He texted the number she had given him before she left Busan. Simple message. I'm in Atlanta. No pressure. Whenever you're ready. She responded 4 hours later with an address that wasn't her home, a park near the neighborhood, big enough for 4 5-year-olds to run, public enough to be safe. He was there before they arrived. He stood near the entrance with his hands in his pocket and watched them come around the corner, Imani in front, the 4 boys in various states of organized chaos around her. Micah walking with his hands clasped behind his back like a small professor, Ellis doing something with a stick he'd found, Jordan already looking ahead and evaluating the terrain with professional interest, Caleb watching the tree line. They saw him before their mother pointed him out. Jordan was the first to stop walking. Then the others, one by one, the way a sentence gets punctuated. He crouched down, not all the way to one knee, just enough to not be towering. Hey, he said. 4 boys looked at him. Hey, Ellis said back. Like it was easy. Like he was the kind of person who made hard things easy by pretending the difficulty was optional. Your mom says you know who I am. She said you're our dad, Jordan said. Flat. Not angry, just empirical. That's right. How come you didn't know about us, Micah said. And there it was. He'd known it was coming. He'd spent the whole flight preparing for it. He had organized 4 different versions of the answer and discarded them all for the same reason. They were all partially true, which meant they were partially not. And he was not going to start this by handing his sons a version of the story that was convenient for him. There are some things that happened between me and your mom that I got wrong, he said. Some of it was my fault. Some of it was other people. But the part where I didn't know about you, that's something I'm going to have to spend a long time making up for. And I know saying sorry is just 2 words, but I'm saying it anyway. He looked at each of them in turn. I'm sorry I didn't know you. I'm going to do better at being here now. Silence. Caleb stepped forward. He was the quietest one, the one who processed through touch and drawing and the interior world. He stepped forward, looked at Tae-ryeon's face, with the focused attention of someone memorizing something important, and then he reached out and put one small hand on Tae-ryeon's jaw. Just held it there, like he was making sure he was real. Tae-ryeon held absolutely still. Then Caleb nodded once, as if confirming a result, and stepped back. Jordan said, "Can you play soccer?" "Not well," Tae-ryeon said honestly. "That's okay," Jordan said. "We'll teach you." Was back in Busan for the senior member meeting on the 7th day. 12 men, the core of the Baekryong leadership structure, lieutenants and advisors, and the 2 family patriarchs from allied branches who had been with the syndicate longer than Tae-ryeon had been alive. They gathered in the private room of a restaurant in Centum City, the one they used for discussions that required both formality and absolute discretion. Seonhwa was present. She had not been told she was required. She had been told her son was addressing the senior leadership about a matter affecting the Kwon family's integrity, and she had come because she understood with the strategic clarity that had always made her formidable and had now made her catastrophic, that being absent would look worse than being present. She sat at the far end of the table in her good clothes, composed as concrete, and she looked at Tae-ryeon with an expression that said she had prepared for this. He laid out the evidence. He didn't editorialize. He didn't perform anger for the room. He walked through the audit findings, the payment records, the fabricated clinic documentation, the timeline, the conversation in her hotel room in which she had confirmed the facts to him, and Daeshik directly. He spoke for 22 minutes without raising his voice above his normal conversational register. When he finished, the room was the quietest he had ever heard it. One of the patriarchs, a 70-year-old man named Beck, who had known Tae-ryeon's father for 40 years, put down his glass very carefully. "You're telling us," Beck said, "that the heir situation, the divorce, the arrangement with the Yoon family, all of it was built on a medical record your mother purchased." "Yes, and that you have 4 sons." Beck looked at Seon-hwa. Seon-hwa looked at the table. For the first time in Tae-ryeon's memory, his mother had no prepared remark. "You want her removed," Beck said, "from every operational role, from every committee and advisory position, from every avenue through which she has historically influenced family business decisions." He paused. "I want it documented, formally, so that it cannot be undone quietly when I'm occupied elsewhere." Beck looked around the table. No one spoke against it. But then Park Sung-jin, the youngest of the senior lieutenants, 38 years old, ambitious in the specific way that people who've been patient for a long time become ambitious, set his hands flat on the table. "I have a question," Park said. "For the record." Tae-ryeon looked at him. "If your mother had not done this, if the children had been known from the beginning," Park's voice was careful, precise. He was choosing every word. "Would you have stayed married to the American woman? Knowing what this organization requires from a Kwan wife. Knowing the internal politics of succession and the pressure from allied families who were never to accept a mixed race line without significant disruption." He paused. "Would you actually have chosen her, or would you have found another reason?" The room went taut. Tae-ryeon looked at Park Sung-jin for a long time. It was the sharpest question anyone had asked him in 7 days. Sharper than anything Imani had said. Sharper than his own internal cross-examination at 3 in the morning in a hotel room over Busan Harbor. Because it was the question he had not let himself ask. The answer formed in him slowly, like something being raised from a depth. He didn't know. He genuinely, in the full honest accounting of himself, did not know whether a younger version of him, the version who had slid papers across a marble table while his mother sat in the room, would have been strong enough to choose Imani against the full weight of everything arrayed against that choice. He didn't know, and that not knowing was its own verdict. "That question," he said slowly, "is the most important one anyone in this room could have asked me." He held Park's eyes. "And I'm not going to insult everyone here by pretending I have a clean answer." He paused. "What I know is who I am now, what I'm capable of now, and what I'm going to do from here." He looked around the table. "The rest is history that can't be revised." Park said nothing further. Seon-hwa looked up from the table. Her eyes found her son's across the length of the room, and in that look was everything that had not been said in her hotel suite, and everything that would not be said here. The specific grief of a woman who had done catastrophic damage in the name of love, and was only now beginning to understand that. The name she'd used did not make the damage different. He held her gaze. He did not soften it for her, but he did not burn it either, and she could read that too. After the meeting, Dae-shik fell into step beside him, in the corridor the way he always did, quiet present, waiting for what came next. "Park will be a problem," Dae-shik said. "I know. He's not wrong, that the succession question is complicated. 4 sons with an American mother, raised in Atlanta, primary custody. They're not inheriting this," Tae-ryeon said. Dae-shik looked at him. "Whatever I'm building," Tae-ryeon said, "whatever I'm converting this into, it's going to be something they can inherit if they want it, and walk away from if they don't." He stopped walking. "This organization in its current form ends with me. That's the decision. I'm not putting it to a vote." Dae-shik was quiet for a moment. "That will cost you." "I know what it'll cost." "Do you?" Tae-ryeon looked at his uncle. "I lost 5 years with 4 sons because I let this organization's requirements overrule every human instinct I had. I'm not doing it again, whatever it costs." He paused. "Make sure Park understands that my decision is made, and the people questioning it are wasting energy they'll need for other things." Dae-shik nodded. They walked out into the Busan afternoon, the smell of the harbor cutting through traffic exhaust, the coastal light doing its particular thing with the high-rise glass, the city running its perpetual commerce at full volume around them. Tae-ryeon stood on the sidewalk outside the restaurant and thought about 4 boys in a park in Atlanta, one of them with his hand pressed against his father's jaw to make sure he was real. He pulled out his phone. He was going to fly back to Atlanta in 3 days for a school event that Micah had mentioned in a tone of careful neutrality that Tae-ryeon had recognized immediately as the tone children use when they want something very badly and have. Decided not to want it visibly in case it doesn't happen. He was going to be there. But first, there was something else he needed to do. Something he had green wood splitting. Something he had been building toward since the moment he walked out of his mother's hotel suite and understood the full architecture of what had been done. He called a number. It rang twice. A woman answered mid-50s, professional tone, with the particular efficiency of someone who had spent decades navigating between legal and extra-legal with equal confidence. "I need to schedule something," Tae-ryeon said, "with Kwon Seon-hwa. Tomorrow, private. Just the two of us. I'll arrange it," the woman said. He put the phone away. He stood for another moment in the Busan afternoon, looking at the harbor in the distance, at the cargo ships moving toward the mouth of the bay with the patient certainty of things that had agreed to carry weight. There was a conversation left to have with his mother that none of the others had been. Not an accusation, not a verdict, not even an accounting, exactly. Something harder than all of those. Was going to sit across from the woman who had cost him 5 years and 4 sons and a marriage and ask her the question that everything else had been circling around since the night in the corridor. Why wasn't I enough of a reason to stop? He didn't know what she'd say. He didn't know if there was an answer that would do anything useful. But he was going to ask it. Because the man who had stood at a window while his mother dismantled his marriage was gone, and the man who had replaced him needed to know every uncomfortable thing that man had looked away from. And this was the last one. The harbor moved. The city was loud around him. He walked. The restaurant where he met his mother the next morning was the one she had always chosen for difficult conversations. Not because it was private, though it was. The corner table screened from the main room by a lacquered partition that had absorbed 40 years of lowered voices and careful words. She chose it because it was hers, her territory. The table where she had conducted the management of her family's affairs for 2 decades, where she had received bad news and delivered worse, where she had presided over the Kwon family's internal politics with the patient authority of a woman who understood that real power was never loud. She was already seated when he arrived. She had ordered tea. 2 cups. She had poured his without asking how he wanted it, which was something she had done his entire life, the small's assumption of knowing what he needed before he knew it himself, the micro-authority that accumulates into something enormous over 39 years and only becomes visible when you look at it directly. He sat down. He did not touch the tea. She looked at him the way she always did across important tables, still composed, with that geological patience that nothing seemed to crack. But something had shifted since the hotel suite, since the senior member meeting. He could see it in the way she held her cup both hands, which was not her usual manner. A containment gesture, something that needed steadying. "You wanted to talk," she said. "Yes, then talk." He looked at his mother. He had prepared the question for 24 hours. A sound like green wood splitting. He had turned it over every way it could be turned, looking for a version that was less devastating, that was more civilized, that would allow the conversation to proceed without burning through the floor they were both standing on. He hadn't found one. "Did you think about what it would do to her?" he said. "Not to the marriage, not to the family plan, to Imani. The person." He paused. "When you sat in that office and arranged the diagnosis. When you thought through what shot she would feel when a doctor told her she could never have children. Did you think about that part?" Seon-hwa looked at her tea. "I thought about what was necessary," she said. "That's not what I asked." "Tae-ryeon, I know what you thought was necessary." His voice was quiet. "I sat through the meeting. I've read the documents. I understand the logic you used. I'm asking whether inside that logic there was any room for the fact that you were destroying a person." He stopped. "A person I loved." The word sat between them on the table, like something neither of them was sure how to handle. Seon-hwa set down her cup. "You were going to destroy yourself," she said. "That marriage was going to cost you the organization. You know it. The internal pressure from Baek's faction, from the allied families, from the men who'd been watching For any sign that you were choosing sentiment over succession, it would have been used against you. Maybe, not maybe, he said again firmly. Because I ran that organization. And the people who would have used it against me were people I had leverage over. I was 34 years old. My father had been dead for 2 years, and I had already consolidated more of the syndicate's external operations than my father had managed in a decade. I was not weak. He leaned forward slightly. You didn't do this because I couldn't handle the political pressure. You did this because you didn't want a black American woman in this family. Say it plainly. The silence stretched. I wanted what was right for the Kwan name, she said. Say it plainly. Her jaw tightened. The composure held, but something behind it, some interior structure, gave a millimeter. I didn't believe she belonged here. I didn't believe her children would belong here. I didn't believe that what she was and where she came from was. She stopped. Say the word you're working toward. Appropriate, she said. I didn't believe it was appropriate. He sat back. He looked at his mother, this woman who had run a household and navigated a criminal empire and raised him after his father died and built her authority through decades of tactical patience. And he felt something that was not quite hate and not quite grief, and lived in the territory between them where the most complicated human emotions tend to settle. She built a company, he said, from her grandmother's recipes, in her parents' kitchen, while raising 4 children by herself. Her brand is in 17 countries. She took nothing from us, from me, from this family, and built something that puts her on a stage in Busan receiving an international award. He paused. She is the most appropriate person I have ever known. And she would have been extraordinary for this family, if you had let her. Seonhwa said nothing. You spent 5 years making sure the Kwan line had an heir, he said. You drove out the woman who was already carrying 4 of them. He stood up. I'm not ending this relationship, he said. You're my mother. That doesn't stop being true, because you did something I can't forgive yet. He picked up his jacket. But you don't make decisions for this family anymore. Not about money, not about operations, not about my sons, not about anything that moves through the Kwan name. That's not a punishment. That's a fact. He paused at the edge of the table. And if you want to know those boys someday, if you want any version of a relationship with your grandsons, you will need to earn that. From Imani, not from me. He left the restaurant. Outside, the Busan morning was doing what Busan mornings did, in late spring salt air and brightness, and the harbor moving in the background of everything, the city loud and practical and completely indifferent to the Kwan family's interior disaster. He stood on the sidewalk. His phone buzzed. Daeshik. A message, not a call. Park Sung-jin called an informal gathering last night. 6 lieutenants. I wasn't invited. Sources say succession was discussed. He read it twice. He typed back, how informal. Daeshik responded in under a minute, informal enough that no one expected me to find out. Which means they underestimate my sources. Which means Park is moving faster than he should. Tae-ryeon put the phone in his pocket and stood there for a moment longer. Park Sung-jin. He had known Park for 11 years. Recruited him personally from a rival organization when Park was 27 and already running logistics for half the eastern coastal operations with the kind of efficiency that suggested both intelligence and ambition. He had been useful. He had been loyal, or what passed for loyalty in their world, a cost-benefit calculation that had always resolved in Tae-ryeon's favor until the math changed. The math had changed. The moment Tae-ryeon said, "This organization ends with me," in a room full of people who had organized their futures around inheriting a piece of it, he had given Park a reason, a clear, documented, senior leadership witnessed reason to start building an alternative. He called Daeshik. How many of the 6 are actually his? Tae-ryeon said when his uncle picked up. Not how many attended. How many would move if he moved? A pause. 3. Possibly 4. Which 3 are certain? Daeshik gave him the names. He walked. Not back to the hotel. Just walked it, the way he sometimes did when information needed to settle before he could act on it correctly along the harbor road. Past the container terminal, into the texture of the working city where nobody knew his name and the air smelled like fuel and ocean and real life. Park was not going to make an open move. He was too precise for that. He was going to build quietly, position carefully, Wait for Tae-ryeon to be occupied elsewhere at Atlanta, the legitimate business conversions, the new structure that required his constant attention, and then surface with enough of the organization already behind him that a confrontation would be costly. He was going to use Tae-ryeon's sons against him. Not physically. Not yet. But politically, the optics of a Kwon boss who had relocated significant personal attention to America, who had canceled a wedding to an allied family over children he hadn't known existed, who had publicly stripped his own mother's authority, who was dismantling the syndicate's most profitable operations in favor of a legitimate empire nobody had asked for. Park was going to let that story write itself and then offer the lieutenants an alternative. Tae-ryeon understood this with the clarity of a man who had done similar calculations himself from the other side. He stopped walking. He turned around. He called a different number, not Daeshik, not anyone in the organization's formal structure. A man named Cho, who ran security intelligence with the kind of institutional invisibility that made him the most useful person in Tae-ryeon's network. I need everything on Park's last 30 days, he said. Meetings, calls, money movement, travel, everything. Timeline, tonight, a pause. That's expensive. Tonight, Tae-ryeon said again. Put the phone away and walked back toward the hotel, and somewhere in Atlanta, 4 boys were going through a Tuesday that their father was not present for, and he was going to fix that. But first, he had to deal with the thing that was threatening to make it impossible. Cho delivered at 9:47 that evening. Tae-ryeon sat at the desk in his suite and read through the intelligence package with the focused speed of someone who had been reading documents like this for 15 years. He highlighted 3 items. First, Park had met twice in the past month with a representative of the Choi family, a rival syndicate operating out of Incheon that had been attempting to expand into Busan's port operations for 7 years and had been blocked each time by Baek-ryeon's territorial control. The meetings had taken place in a private restaurant in Itaewon, paid in cash, attended by a total of 5 people. Second, a property registered to a shell company with Park's wife's maiden name had received a significant cash deposit 12 days ago. The amount was consistent with a retainer payment of the kind used when establishing a new organizational alliance. Third, one of the 3 lieutenants Daeshik had identified as certainly in Park's corner had, 2 weeks ago, quietly moved his family from Busan to Incheon. Tae-ryeon set the pages down. He looked at the wall. Park wasn't building an alternative succession. He was negotiating a sale. He was going to deliver Baek-ryeon's port operations to the Choi family in exchange for being installed as the operational head of the merged territory, a managed takeover dressed as an internal leadership transition, timed to execute while Tae-ryeon was distracted by family reconstruction. It was a good plan. It would have worked on a different version of him, the version who hadn't spent the past week being systematically stripped of every comfortable assumption he'd built his life on, leaving behind something rawer and more attentive. He picked up the phone and called Park directly. It rang 4 times, long enough that he thought it was going to voicemail. Then Park answered, and his voice had the specific quality of a man who knew he'd been caught by the ringtone alone, who understood that when the call comes this late from the person you're moving against, the intelligence has already landed. Tae-ryeon, Park said, still respectful, still composed. The man was good. Come to the hotel, Tae-ryeon said. Now a pause. It's late. I'm aware of what time it is. Another pause. Longer. In that pause, Park was calculating whether Tae-ryeon had enough, whether this was a confrontation or an execution, whether there was a version of this conversation he could survive, and in what posture. I'll be there in 40 minutes, Park said. He was there in 35. He came alone, which told Tae-ryeon something either confidence or a studied performance of confidence. And with Park, it was difficult to know the difference, because the man had spent a decade maintaining both simultaneously. He was 38 years old and looked younger, with the kind of controlled physical presence that came from discipline rather than nature. He sat across from Tae-ryeon at the suite's small conference table without being invited to sit, which was a tell. He was already repositioning their dynamic, already practicing the posture of a peer rather than a lieutenant. Tae-ryeon let him sit. He placed Cho's intelligence package on the table between them. Park looked at it. He didn't touch it. Inchin, Tae-ryeon said. Park said something. The Choi family. Twice in a month. Tae-ryeon leaned back in his chair. I want to understand something. Not the mechanics, I understand the mechanics. What I want to understand is the timeline. He paused. Was this already in motion before the meeting? Before I said what I said about succession. Park looked at him with the eyes of a man deciding how honest to be. It was a conversation. Preliminary. That started when? 6 months ago. A beat. After you canceled the Yoon arrangement the first time. Tae-ryeon absorbed this, the first time. There was a conversation in March. With Se-jin's family. That didn't become public. But people talk. Park kept his voice level. You canceled the arrangement quietly in March, then reinstated it. That kind of indecision, it gets noticed. It creates questions about what you're managing against. And you decided the answer to that question was to open a channel to Choi. I decided the organization needed options, Park said. In case the leadership direction became unsustainable. In case I became unsustainable. A pause. Yes, Tae-ryeon appreciated the honesty. He didn't show it. And the property transfer. The deposit. Park's composure shifted fractionally. He hadn't expected that specific detail to be on the table. He reassembled quickly. The man was skilled, but the fraction-second gap was enough. That's my private. It's not, Tae-ryeon said. Nothing in this organization is private from me. That was established when you joined, and it hasn't changed. Park looked at him. You're moving your family, Tae-ryeon said. Cho Byung-soo moved his family to Incheon 14 days ago. You're preparing a transition. He paused. How far along is the agreement with Choi? A long silence. Far enough, Park said finally. The admission sat between them with its full weight. Far enough meant it wasn't theoretical anymore. Far enough meant there were terms, commitments, a structure that had been negotiated and agreed upon. Far enough meant that Park had already decided what was going to resolve and had come to this meeting to determine whether it was going to resolve cleanly or expensively. Tae-ryeon looked at the man across from him. He felt the thing that used to come easily in these moments, the cold calculation, the threat assessment, the move and counter-move architecture that had kept him dominant in this organization for a decade, was still there. It had not gone anywhere, but layered over it now was something that made it more complicated to deploy. Something that had it posited in him over the past 10 days by 4 boys in a hotel corridor and a woman with a bag still on her shoulder and a question about whether he would have chosen her. He was tired of the machinery, not afraid of it, not incapable of it. Just tired of a world where this was the texture of every important conversation, this constant calculation of leverage and exposure, this permanent geometry of threat and consequence. But he was not going to let Park dismantle what he was building for his sons. That was the line. Here's what's going to happen, Tae-ryeon said. He kept his voice the same register, the same pace, nothing performed. You're going to contact the Choi representative and inform them the arrangement is canceled. You're going to give me the full documentation of what was agreed, every term, every name, every number. And then you're going to resign from this organization. Park looked at him. In exchange, Tae-ryeon continued, I don't pursue the legal exposure of what you've done. The personal exposure. You take the Incheon property and whatever you've been paid so far and you build something with it that has nothing to do with my operations. He paused. That's the offer. And if I decline, then we have a different conversation. One that ends differently for you. Park sat with it. He was smart enough to know that the threat was real. He was smart enough to know that the offer was also real, that Tae-ryeon was giving him a way out that preserved his life and his family's stability, because the alternative was that kind of protracted organizational conflict that destroyed things far beyond its immediate combatants. He was also smart enough to know why the offer existed. You don't want the fight, Park said slowly, not because you can't win it. Because winning it costs time you're not willing to spend away from Atlanta. Tae-ryeon said nothing. Your sons, Park said, not cruelly, just with the precise perception of a man who understood motivations. You can't be in 2 places at once, And you've already decided which place you're choosing. Yes, Tae-ryeon said simply. Park looked at the table. He picked up the intelligence package, just the edge of it, turning it slightly, looking at the pages without reading them. Setting things down internally, making the calculation. The documentation by tomorrow morning, he said. By tomorrow morning. Park stood. He straightened his jacket with both hands, another containment gesture, finding composure in the physical. He looked at Tae-ryeon one final time, with the expression of a man who respects an outcome, even while losing to it. For what it's worth, Park said, I thought you were finished. The wedding cancellation, the mother situation, the announcement about succession. He paused. I thought you were pulling apart. I was, Tae-ryeon said. And then I put myself back together differently. Park left. Tae-ryeon sat at the table for a long time after. He thought about Dae-shik's words in the hospital corridor after the hotel. She protected them from your world. He thought about Imani in the doorway of his suite, bag on her shoulder, giving him 30 minutes. He thought about Caleb's hand on his jaw, checking if he was real. He pulled out his phone and booked the earliest flight to Atlanta in the morning. Then he called Dae-shik. Park will deliver documentation tomorrow, he said when his uncle answered. He's out. The 3 lieutenants with him, I need individual conversations this week. Not threats. Conversations. I want to know who stays and who follows Park, and I want them to make that decision with full information about where this organization is going. And where is it going, Dae-shik said. Somewhere they can be proud of in 10 years. He paused. Or somewhere they leave. Either way, I need to know. The Choi family won't like the arrangement being cancelled. The Choi family will adapt. They always do. Tae-ryeon. Dae-shik's voice went careful. The careful uncle voice. The one that carried weight without wielding it. You are restructuring the organization. Managing your mother's fallout. Negotiating with Park. Flying back and forth to Atlanta. Trying to build a relationship with 4 sons who don't know you yet. And somewhere in all of that, trying to figure out what you want from a woman who is entirely within her rights to never give it to you. A pause. That's a lot of structural load for one person. I know. I'm asking if you're all right. The question landed unexpectedly. Not because it was unusual Dae-shik asked it sometimes. In the years after Tae-ryeon's father died, when the weight of early leadership had been visible in ways Tae-ryeon hadn't known how to hide yet. But it had been a long time since anyone had asked it. And the honest answer was more complicated than the question assumed. I'm the most clear-headed I've been in 5 years, Tae-ryeon said. And the most exhausted, both of those things at the same time. That's usually what doing the right thing feels like, Dae-shik said. He hung up. He landed in Atlanta at 6:20 in the morning local time, having slept for approximately 90 minutes on the plane in the specific shallow way of someone whose mind refused to fully disengage. He went to the hotel, showered, changed, drank coffee that wasn't good enough, and at 8:15 sent Imani a message. I'm in Atlanta. I know I wasn't expected until Thursday. Something came up organizationally that I handled, and I got on a plane. I'm not asking for anything today. I just wanted you to know I'm here. She read it. The read receipt appeared within 4 minutes, which meant she was already up, already moving through the logistics of a morning with 4 children, already in the operational rhythm of a life she had built entirely without his participation. She responded 11 minutes later, boys have school until 3. There's a diner 2 blocks from your hotel. Meet me at 9. He was there at 8:50. She arrived at 9:02, still in the clothing she'd thrown on for the school drop-off. Jeans, a burgundy jacket he didn't recognize, her hair not yet fully organized for the day. She slid into the booth across from him and picked up the laminated menu like she ate here regularly, which she probably did. What happened, she said, not looking up from the menu. He told her about Park, about Cho's report, about the meeting and the offer and the documentation coming this morning. He kept it concise. She was not interested in the operational details. He knew that, but she was interested in what the threat had been and whether he'd handled it. She listened the way she always listened, completely, without performance. When he finished, she set the menu down. Was there physical danger? No. Was there risk to the boys? No, it never approached that. But it could have. He paused. In the version of this where I didn't catch it in time, yes. It could have become a situation that created risk. She looked at him across the laminate table in the diner, with its smell of butter and coffee and something frying in the back, and she did the thing he had come to recognize as her particular form of assessment, not angry, not afraid, just measuring the distance between what he was saying and what it meant for the people she was responsible for. You caught it in time, she said. Yes, this time. He met her eyes. Yes, this time. She absorbed the honesty of that, the implicit acknowledgement that this time was not a guarantee of all times, that the world he was dismantling had a long perimeter, and dismantling, it was not a switch you flipped, but a process that created its own dangers as it went. How long? She said. To get it to a place where this kind of threat is structural rather than personal. Where the people who want what you're moving away from don't have a reason to come at you through. She stopped. Through the boys. Yes, he thought about seriously. He owed her a real number, not a comfortable one. 3 years. Possibly 4. If I'm moving at the pace I can sustain, without the organization fragmenting in ways that are harder to manage than a controlled transition. He paused. It's faster if I'm not constantly managing it from across the Pacific. She looked at him. I'm not asking you to, he started. I know what you're not asking, she said. I can hear the sentence you're not finishing. He stopped. She turned her coffee cup in her hands. Once around, I built Bellamy Noir from my parents' kitchen in this city. My infrastructure is here. My team is here. The boys' school is here. My parents are 15 minutes away. She looked at him. I'm not moving to Korea, I know. But I'm also not, she paused. Seemed to be finding the edges of something. I'm not going to make it impossible for you to be present. That was never the goal. She looked down at her cup. The goal was always just to make sure they were safe. That comes first. Before what I need, before what you need, before she stopped again. Before what? He said carefully. She looked at him. The diner noise moved around them, plates and conversation, and the bell above the door as someone came in from the street, and inside that noise, she was looking at him with something that was not the professional distance she'd worn in the hotel. Sweet, and not the measured conditioned setting of the airport conversation, but something older. Something that predated all of it. He did not press it. A sound wood splitting. He had been pressing the wrong things for too long, and he understood now that the most important movements between them were not going to be achieved by pressure. They were going to require the one thing that had always been hardest for him. Patience. Real patience. Not strategic patience, the kind he used in negotiations, which was just pressure wearing a different face. Actual patience. The kind that accepted not getting what it wanted and kept showing up anyway. Before what's fair to either of us, she finished. And she let that sit between them, like something delicate that neither of them should grab at. He nodded. They ordered breakfast. He had eggs and bad coffee and a side of toast that he didn't finish, and she had something with avocado that she ate with the focus of someone who had 45 minutes and a full day on the other side of them. And they talked about the boys Micah's reading level, which was apparently extraordinary, and Ellis's most recent attempt to convince a teacher that the school's lunch policy was unconstitutional, and Jordan's first soccer game, that Saturday, and Caleb's latest notebook, which was apparently filled with architectural drawings of cities that didn't exist. He listened. He listened the way he should have listened years ago to the person across from him who was telling him who their children were. Outside the diner window, Atlanta was doing its morning thing, traffic and humidity, and the particular quality of southern summer light that arrived early and stayed personal. He watched a delivery truck navigate a too small turn and thought about how much of the last 10 days had been about him, recognizing the dimensions of things he'd misjudged. His phone buzzed on the table. He glanced at it. Daeshik. Documentation received. Park is clean. He turned the phone face down. Imani noticed. Everything okay, she said. Park delivered, he said. It's handled. She nodded, went back to her food. Then she looked up. Jordan is going to ask you about soccer Saturday. He'll pretend it's casual. It won't be. He looked at her. I'll be there. I know you will, she said it without surprise. Like it was already established fact. And the way she said it without the edge of testing it, without the protective skepticism that had been present in every prior exchange, told him something had shifted. Not much, not enough to name, but something. He picked up his coffee cup. She picked up hers. They sat in the diner in the Atlanta morning, with their mediocre coffee and the noise of ordinary life around them. And for the first time in 10 days in 5 years, there was no immediate disaster to navigate. No document to sign or confrontation to manage or distance to close at speed. Just the table. Just the two of them, with the history between them and the 4 boys who were at school 2 miles away, being Micah and Ellis and Jordan and Caleb, being 5 years old and entirely themselves, unaware that their father had handled something in Korea at midnight and flown 9 hours to be in this city before they got out of school. His phone buzzed again. He ignored it. She raised an eyebrow. "You don't have to." "It can wait," he said. She looked at him. Not long. Just a look that registered something and moved on, the way you register a small change in a landscape you've been watching for a long time. The morning light came through the window at the angle that turns everything amber. He had a soccer game on Saturday. He had 3 years of careful work ahead of him, and 4 sons he was learning 1 notebook drawing, and 1 constitutional argument, and 1 assessment stare at a time. And he had the woman across from him, and he had the woman across from him who had built a life he couldn't touch, and was allowing him anyway into the parts that mattered. His phone buzzed a 3rd time. Imani reached across the table. She turned it face up. The screen showed 3 messages from Daeshik, and 1 from a number he'd flagged as Choi family contact unknown to her. But the fact that it existed, that it was buzzing insistently on a Wednesday morning at 9:22 Atlanta time, meant that the world he was leaving was not finished leaving him yet. She looked at the screen. She looked at him. "Go," she said. Not angry, just honest. "It's fine. I need to get to the office anyway." He picked up the phone. He looked at the messages. "Daeshik, Choi representative contacted me directly. They're not accepting the cancellation. They want a face-to-face. Daeshik, they're flying to Busan tonight. Daeshik, Tae-ryeon. This needs you here. Today." He sat with the phone in his hand, and the weight of it was the exact weight of the thing he had been trying to reduce the pull of a world that did not care about soccer games, or diners, or the precise quality of a look across a table, that cared only about power and territory, and who showed up when you pressed. He looked at Imani. She was watching him with her coat, already half on, her bag over her shoulder again, her face doing the thing it did when it was being very deliberately not expectant, giving him the room to make the choice without her expression loading it. He stood. He put cash on the table. "Saturday," he said. She looked at him. "I'll be there Saturday," he said. "Whatever this is, I'll handle it and I'll be back by Saturday." Something in her face moved. Tae-ryeon. "I know I haven't earned the right to make promises," he said. "I'm making this one anyway, Saturday. Jordan's game." She looked at him for a long moment. "Thursday," she said. "I'll tell the boys you're coming Thursday for dinner. That gives you a day of buffer, if something runs long." He understood what she was doing. She was protecting from a disappointment. She wasn't yet certain. He wouldn't deliver, building a margin of error into his promise, without telling him she was doing it. It was the most practical form of love he had ever seen, and it landed in him like something structural. "Thursday," he said. She walked out of the diner. He stood at the table for exactly 4 seconds. Then he called Daeshik and said, "Tell the Choi representative I'll be in Busan by tomorrow morning. Tell him this meeting will be the last one we ever have." He walked out into the Atlanta morning and raised his arm for a cab, and the city moved around him the way cities do, without regard, without pause, in the full ongoing noise of lives that had nothing to do with his. He had 20 hours. The Choi family was not going to walk away from this cleanly, and he had known it since the moment he told Park the arrangement was canceled. Some things in his world did not resolve with a document and a handshake. Some things required a room and a conversation that nobody's walked out of unless they understood, at the cellular level, what the alternative looked like. He was going to have that conversation, and then he was going to get on a plane. And Thursday, he was going to sit at a table in Atlanta with 4 boys who were learning what kind of man he was going to be, and he was going to show them. The cab pulled up. He got in. The driver asked where to. "Airport," he said. And outside the window, Atlanta kept moving, enormous and indifferent and alive. The city where his sons were in school right now, not knowing any of this, just being children on an ordinary Wednesday. And that ordinariness, that protected ordinary Wednesday that Imani had built around them, with 5 years of everything she had, was exactly what he was going to that airport to defend. The Choi family representative's name was Choi Tae-ryeon, and he was 54 years old and had been doing this specific kind of business for 30 of those years, which meant he had sat across from many dangerous men in many private rooms and had developed a professional immunity to the atmosphere such rooms produced. That immunity lasted approximately 4 minutes into his meeting with Tae-ryeon. The room was a private office on the 3rd floor of a Tae-ryeon-owned building in Hyundai, not a restaurant, not a hotel suite, not anywhere designed to soften the geometry of what was happening. Just a room with a table and chairs and windows that looked out over the harbor, and Daeshik standing near the door with the particular stillness of a man who had been asked to witness rather than participate. Tae-ryeon came in from a 14-hour travel day Atlanta to Seoul, Seoul to Busan, a car from the airport, and he had not slept, and he had not changed clothes, and he sat down across from Choi Tae-ryeon with the specific quality of attention that exhaustion sometimes produces in people who are built for pressure, stripped of everything peripheral, down to the essential, operating from a place so far inside themselves that the outside had no purchase on their composure. Choi Tae-ryeon set his hands flat on the table and said, "The arrangement with Park was legitimate. We operated in good faith. Cancellation at this stage exposes us to—" "Nothing," Tae-ryeon said. Tae-ryeon stopped. "The arrangement with Park was not legitimate," Tae-ryeon said. "It was constructed without my knowledge or authorization by a lieutenant who was negotiating the sale of assets he does not own. Any agreement built on that foundation is not a contract. It's a document." He paused. "I'm not here to negotiate. I'm here to be clear." Tae-ryeon looked at him. He was a careful man. You didn't survive 30 years in this business being anything else, and his carefulness was visible in the way he held his face. But behind it, the calculation was running. He was measuring the distance between what he'd expected walking in here and what was actually sitting across from him. "The port operations," Tae-ryeon said. "Busan's Eastern Terminal. The access agreements your family has held for 20 years. We were promised. You were promised something by a man who was stealing it," Tae-ryeon said. "The Eastern Terminal stays with us through the legal transition I'm managing. In 3 years, it will be part of a legitimate holding structure. At that point, if your family wants to negotiate commercial access, actual commercial access, shipping contracts, not criminal operational control, I'm open to that conversation." Tae-ryeon was quiet. "But that conversation," Tae-ryeon continued, "requires that you walk out of this room today having accepted that what Park sold you doesn't exist, and that any attempt to enforce it through pressure, through the lieutenants he's been cultivating, through any other avenue, will result in a response that is considerably more expensive than whatever you paid Park." He said it without raising his voice. He said it the way you state a fact about weather. Tae-ryeon looked at the table. He turned his phone over once, face down. He breathed through his nose. These were the small performances of a man resetting his position, finding the version of this outcome he could walk back to Incheon with and present as something other than a total loss. "The deposit," Tae-ryeon said. "What we paid Park. That's between you and Park." Tae-ryeon stood. "I'd suggest having that conversation with him quickly, before he makes the deposit difficult to locate." He walked out. In the corridor, Daeshik fell into step beside him. They moved toward the elevator in silence. The building smelled like recirculated air and the faint chemical undertone of industrial cleaning products. And through the stairwell windows, the harbor was doing its perpetual thing, cargo moving, water moving, the world's commerce in its endless circulation. "That's it," Daeshik said. "That's it. He'll push back. He'll push back through channels that have nothing to do with my sons or my organization's legitimate operations," Tae-ryeon said. "And when he does, we'll handle it through channels that have nothing to do with violence." He pressed the elevator button. "This is what transition looks like. It's slow and it's uncomfortable, and not every problem resolves cleanly. But I'm not responding to pressure by reverting to the version of this that I'm trying to leave. Daeshik was quiet for a moment. You're different. I'm tired, Tae-ryeon said. It has a similar effect. The elevator opened. They rode down in silence. Outside, the Busan evening was coming in off the water, that coastal dusk that smelled like everything at once, like T's whole industrial and human complexity distilled into one specific quality of air. Tae-ryeon stood on the sidewalk and breathed it in. He had a flight to Atlanta in 16 hours. He went to the hotel and slept for 9 of them, the deep structural sleep of a body that had been running on discipline alone and was being given permission to stop. He woke up before his alarm, showered, called Daeshik with 3 operational directives for the week, and got in the car to the airport. On the plane, he did something he hadn't done in years. He sat with nothing. No documents, no calls, no strategic architecture. He put his phone in his jacket pocket and looked out the window at the Sea of Japan going silver in the morning light, and he let his mind go wherever it went, without following it or correcting it, and what it went to mostly was the diner. The laminate table. The way Imani had turned his phone face up and said go, not as a dismissal but as an acknowledgement that the world he was managing was real and required management, and she was not going to pretend otherwise. She had never pretended. That was the thing about her he had underestimated, or not underestimated exactly, but failed to fully metabolize. She was not the kind of person who looked away from difficulty. She looked straight at it, named it accurately, and then decided what she was going to do about it. She had been doing that since a hospital bed in Busan, at 4 in the morning when she was carrying 4 lives and had just been handed papers that ended another. He had spent 5 years on the other side of the world, believing, on some level that he hadn't examined closely, that she was managing, that she had found her footing, that the Imani he had married was somewhere in Atlanta, being fine. She was more than fine. That was the thing that had landed on him slowly, over the past 2 weeks, the thing he was still absorbing. She had not survived his family's cruelty. She had converted it. She had taken the wreckage of what had been done to her and used it as construction material for something that was entirely, unambiguously hers. That was not a small thing. That was the largest thing he had ever been adjacent to. He landed in Atlanta on Thursday morning. Imani's house was in a neighborhood of wide streets and old trees whose roots had been pushing up the sidewalks for decades without anyone finding the urgency to fix them. The houses were not large by the standards of what her company could now afford. She had bought this one before Bellamy Noir went international, when she told Mills manufacturing out of a leased facility in Decatur and doing her own bookkeeping on Sunday nights after the boys went to sleep. She had stayed because the boys knew the street and the neighbors knew the boys, and because she was not a person who upgraded her life every time her income made it possible. He stood in front of it at 5:47 in the evening with a bag that he'd dropped at the hotel and a phone full of messages he'd handled on the drive over, and he rang the bell. Micah opened the door. He looked at Tae-ryeon with that old soul assessment, the one that seemed to run a full diagnostic before returning a result. You came back. I said I would. People say that. I know. He met the boy's eyes. I'm going to keep saying it, and then keep doing it until saying it is redundant. How long that takes is up to you. Micah considered this with the seriousness of a small academic. Then he stepped back from the door. Inside, the house smelled like something cooking, something with garlic and something sweet underneath it. The kind of smell that a house accumulates when it has been cooked in consistently by someone who learned from someone who learned from someone. He followed Micah through a hallway lined with school artwork and photographs and one framed Bellamy Noir campaign image that had apparently made it into the home because the boys had insisted and not because Imani had decorated with her own brand. The kitchen was loud. Ellis was sitting on the counter, doing something that appeared to involve a rubber band and a spoon. Jordan was on the floor, with a soccer ball between his knees, watching a video on a tablet with the focused intensity of a person studying tactical footage. Caleb was at the kitchen table with a notebook open, a pencil moving in slow, deliberate strokes, not looking up. Imani was at the stove. She turned when she heard them come in, and her expression did the thing it did. Now, not the professional neutrality and not the old warmth, exactly, but something that lived in the specific country between those two places. Acknowledgement, measured welcome. The face of a woman who was deciding, each time she looked at him, how much further she was willing to let him in. "You made it," she said. "I made it." Ellis looked up from the rubber band project. "Did you fix the Korea thing, Ellis?" Imani said. "What?" "He was in Korea. Mom said there was a work thing." Ellis looked at Tae-ryeon with the particular directness of a child who had decided that adults found his questions disarming and had chosen to use this strategically. "Was it dangerous?" "It was complicated," Tae-ryeon said. "It's handled." "What kind of complicated?" Ellis. Imani's voice had the specific frequency that closed conversations. Ellis returned to the rubber band. Jordan, without looking up from the tablet, said, "You're coming Saturday." "Not a question." "Yes," Tae-ryeon said. Jordan nodded once, eyes still on the screen, in the manner of someone receiving a confirmed logistical detail. Caleb looked up from his notebook. He looked at Tae-ryeon for a moment, with that focused, memorizing attention, then looked back down and kept drawing. Tae-ryeon stood in the kitchen of the house where his sons lived and felt the accumulated ordinary reality of it, the noise and the rubber band and the soccer footage and the pencil moving land in. Him with a weight that had nothing to do with drama. It was just the weight of real life. Specific and unrepeatable, and his if he was careful with it. "Can I do anything?" he said to Imani. She looked at him. "For dinner," he said. "Is there something I can do?" She was quiet for a moment. Then she handed him a knife and a cutting board and pointed at a bowl of vegetables on the counter. He cut vegetables. Ellis watched him with the critical eye of someone who had opinions about knife technique in a 5-year-old's body. "You're doing it wrong," probably Tae-ryeon said. "Mom does it different. I'll get better." Ellis appeared to weigh this response for accuracy, found it acceptable, and returned to the rubber band. Dinner was loud in the way that meals with 4 or 5-year-olds are loud, not chaotic exactly, but fully inhabited. Every conversational frequency occupied simultaneously, the boys talking over and around each other with the overlapping fluency of people who have been in constant proximity since before they understood what proximity meant. He mostly listened. He asked questions when there was space for them about school, about soccer, about what Caleb was drawing in the notebook that lived permanently near his left hand. Caleb described a city he was designing. It had 2 rivers and a bridge that could move and a market district, where you could buy things that didn't exist yet. "What things?" Tae-ryeon said. Caleb thought about it. "Food from places that aren't countries yet." Tae-ryeon looked at this child, his child who was building imaginary cities with imaginary geographies at the age of 5, and felt something in his chest that didn't have a clean name, but that he understood was going to be permanent. After dinner, after the boys had been moved through the complex logistics of bath time and the prolonged negotiation of bedtime that apparently involved a rotating reading schedule, and at least one argument about whose turn it was to choose the book, Imani came back downstairs to find him washing dishes. She stopped in the kitchen doorway. "You don't have to." "I know," he said. She came in and dried while he washed, and they stood at the sink in the kitchen of the house she had bought before she was wealthy, doing the most ordinary thing. And the quiet that settled between them was different from all the other quiets they had inhabited in the past 2 weeks. It didn't have the weight of confrontation in it. It didn't have the shape of a negotiation. It was just quiet when the dishes were done. She put the kettle on, and they sat at the kitchen table, the same table where Caleb drew cities with tea that she made from a tin that had Korean lettering on it, which he noticed and didn't comment on, though something moved in him when he saw it. "Bellamy Noir's Korean launch," she said, following his eyes to the tin. "We're partnering with 3 sole distributors. The tea was a gift from one of them." She paused. "I go to Korea twice a year now. For business." He looked at her. "I have been for 18 months, she said. "I've been in Fasan. Multiple times." She held her cup. "I didn't contact you." He sat with that. "I thought about it," she said. "Each time. I thought about whether," she stopped. Found the sentence again. "Whether it was the right thing for the boys. Whether the timing was right. Whether I was making the decision for good reasons or because I was." Another stop. "Afraid of what would happen if I didn't." If they kept growing up without knowing him, what stopped you? She looked at her cup. I hadn't decided yet who you were, she said. The man I married and the man who is trying to become something different. I didn't know if they were the same person or different people or whether it mattered. She looked at him. I'm still deciding. What would help, he said. Which I know is not a satisfying answer. It's an honest one. She almost smiled, almost. You've gotten better at accepting honest answers. I've gotten better at deserving them, he said. They drank their tea. The house settled around them, the particular sounds of a house at night with children in it, small creaks, and the distant sound of one of them still moving around upstairs, the refrigerator doing its periodic hum, the trees outside doing something slow and seasonal in the dark. I need to tell you something, she said. He set down his cup. My investigator, the one who found Park Sung-won before he died. She folded both hands around her tea. He gave a formal statement before he died. Witnessed, notarized. About what he was paid to do, and by whom. She paused. I have it. I've had it for 18 months. He looked at her. I could have used it, she said. Legally. I had grounds for significant civil action against the Kwon family. Against your mother, specifically. Against the clinic. She held his gaze. I chose not to. Why? Because the only thing that kind of legal fight would have guaranteed was my son's names in documents connected to a criminal family's medical fraud case, and I wasn't willing to do that to them for any amount of money or vindication. She paused. And because I didn't want my company built on a lawsuit. I wanted it built on what it actually is. He looked at this woman. He thought about what it had cost her to hold that document for 18 months. To have the weapon and choose not to use it. Not because she was weak, everything about her argued against weak, but because she had decided what kind of person she was going to be, what kind of life she was going to build, what her sons were going to grow up watching her do when she had been genuinely wronged. Imani, he said, don't quiet, not unkind. Don't tell me I'm extraordinary. I know what I am. I also know what it cost me. Those are both true, and you don't need to canonize either one. He closed his mouth. What I'm telling you, she said, is that I'm not holding it over you. The document, the choice I made, I'm not keeping it in reserve as leverage. She looked at him steadily. I'm telling you because I think you deserve to know all of it. The full picture. Not the version where I'm the perfect wronged woman and you're the villain who gets redeemed. Just, she stopped, what it actually was. Complicated people in a hard situation, making choices they have to live with. He looked at her for a long time. What do you want? He said finally. Not for the boys. For you. What do you want from whatever this is? She was quiet. Not the quiet of someone who didn't know. The quiet of someone deciding whether to say it. I want to not be afraid, she said at last. Of what's coming through the door. Of who you're going to be next month or next year. Of whether the world you're leaving is going to follow you into this house. She looked at him. I spent 5 years making sure nothing from your world could reach my children. I don't want to spend the next doing the same thing while you're also in their lives. That's fair. I know it's fair. I want to know it's possible. He thought about the Choi meeting, about Park, about Dae-shik's voice saying 3 years, possibly 4. About the Baekryun syndicate's edges and all the things still attached to them that hadn't been cleanly cut yet and would take time and pressure and specific kinds of management before they stopped being live. He told her that, all of it. He did not minimize the timeline or the risk or the parts that were still genuinely unresolved. He had learned, somewhere in the past 2 weeks, that the most useful thing he could offer her was accurate information. Not reassurance, she didn't need reassurance from him. She had built a life that required no reassurance from anyone. But accurate information, so she could make decisions with her eyes open, which was the only way she made decisions. When he finished, she was looking at him with an expression he couldn't fully read. 3 years, she said, at minimum. And during those 3 years, I'll be as present as I can be. I'll be transparent about what's happening on the other side. I'll never bring it into proximity with them. He paused. And if at any point you tell me it's too much that something I'm managing is too close to them, I'll take a step back. No argument, she held his gaze. You said that in the hotel, she said. In Busan. I know. You meant it then? Yes. You mean it now? Yes. She was quiet for a moment. I believe you, she said, which surprises me more than it probably should. He felt that land. She stood. She took both cups to the sink. She ran water over them in the absent way of someone whose hands know what to do while their mind is elsewhere. And then she stood at the sink, looking out the dark window at the backyard, where her son's bikes were visible against the fence in the faint light from the kitchen. Tae-ryeon, she said. Yes, I forgive you. She said it to the window first. Then she turned. Not for you, for me. I've been carrying it for 5 years and I'm tired of the weight of it. She held his eyes. But forgiveness doesn't mean what it used to mean between us. You understand that? Yes, he said. And he did. He understood it completely and without protest. We're not, she stopped. Whatever we were is over. That door is closed. I know. But what we can be. She paused, finding the words with the care of someone who had thought about this alone for a long time. I don't know what that is yet. Something that doesn't have a name because it doesn't need one. Something that works for them first and figures out the rest as it goes. He nodded. That's enough, he said, and he meant it. It was more than enough. It was more than the version of himself who had stood at a window while his mother dismantled his marriage had any right to. Saturday came the way Saturdays do when you have been waiting for them, ordinary in its arrival, quiet in the morning, unremarkable until suddenly it wasn't. The soccer field was a municipal park 10 minutes from the house, the grass slightly too long from recent rain. The portable goals, set up by a coach who ran these games with the cheerful chaos management of someone who had given up on organizing 5-year-olds and had learned instead to direct their energy in approximately the right direction. Tae-ryeon arrived early. He stood on the sideline with his hands in his pockets and watched the team warm up, 12 children in mismatched pennies, running with the focused lack of coordination of people who understood the concept of direction without having fully committed to it. Jordan saw him from across the field. He didn't wave. He didn't run over. He was in the middle of warming up, and he was serious about warming up. But something changed in how he was holding himself, a small straightening, a slight lift in the chin, and Tae-ryeon recognized it because he had seen it in himself at that age, in the 2 photographs that survived from his own childhood. The kid wanted to perform well. For him, Tae-ryeon looked at the grass. He breathed through it. Imani arrived 10 minutes later with Micah, Ellis, and Caleb, the non-playing brothers, in various states of willingness about attending. Micah had a book. Ellis had opinions about where to stand on the sideline. Caleb had his notebook. She stood next to Tae-ryeon without ceremony. They watched Jordan play soccer. Jordan was not the most skilled player on the field. He was aggressive and fast, and had no fear of collision. The ball went where he went, whether that was technically correct or not, and he scored once in the first half, on a shot that was more determination than technique, and celebrated by running directly to the sideline and pointing at Tae-ryeon. Not waving, pointing. I did that, you saw it. Tae-ryeon pressed his lips together. He nodded. Jordan ran back onto the field. Beside him, Imani made a sound that was almost a laugh, small, involuntary, the kind that escapes when something is genuinely good and you weren't braced for it. He's practicing that celebration for 3 days, she said. The pointing, specifically the pointing. He wanted it to be clear who he was pointing at. She paused. I may have heard him practicing it in the bathroom. Tae-ryeon looked at the field, where his son was already elbowing for position near the opposing goal with the cheerful aggression of someone who had decided the rules were guidelines. He's going to be a problem, he said. Already is, she said. Has been since he figured out how doors worked. The second half was louder. Ellis contributed commentary from the sideline that the coach diplomatically did not respond to. Micah read his book with the discipline of someone who had made a commitment and was honoring it, regardless of ambient noise. Caleb drew the field, not the game, but the field itself, the geometry of it, the way the goals anchored the space. Jordan's team lost by 1 goal. He was philosophical about this, in the way that aggressive people are philosophical about losses, already thinking about next time, already identifying what needed to be different, not wasting emotional energy on the result when there was strategic information to extract from it. He came off the field toward his parents, with his pinny twisted and his shin guards doing what shin guards do, after 40 minutes of small body combat. And he looked at Tae-ryeon with the evaluating directness that Tae-ryeon recognized from his own face every morning. "You saw the goal," Jordan said. "I saw it. I got there before Hyunjae and he's faster than me. I noticed that. I cut left before the defender expected it." "I saw it," Jordan nodded. "Processing confirmed. Are you coming to the next one?" "Yes." Another nod. Then Jordan turned and walked toward the snack table with the loose-limbed assurance of someone who had received the information he needed and could now prioritize food. Tae-ryeon looked at Imani. She was watching Jordan at the snack table with the particular expression of a mother watching her child, in a moment that doesn't require intervention, peaceful, present, with something around the eyes that he had come to understand was not happiness exactly, but something more durable. Satisfaction, maybe. The deep, specific satisfaction of someone who has built something good and can stand next to it and know it. "He asked me every morning this week if you were coming," she said. Quiet. Not looking at Tae-ryeon, every single morning. Not dramatically. Just before breakfast. Casual. Like it was one item on an internal checklist. He didn't say anything. She turned and looked at him. "He's going to love you," she said. "All of them are going to love you. Probably already do, in their own ways." She paused. "Don't make them regret it." "I won't. I know you mean that right now." "I mean it permanently," he said. "I understand the difference. I'm telling you the permanent version." She looked at him for a long moment with the full weight of her assessment, the same instrument she'd been running since the hotel corridor in Busan, measuring him against whatever she had decided a man needed to be to stand in this space. She nodded. Once. Small. But it was a different kind of nod than the ones before. It wasn't provisional. It wasn't strategic. It was the nod of someone who had made a decision and was marking the moment of it without ceremony. They walked to the snack table. All six of them, Imani and Tae-ryeon and Micah, with his book still open, and Ellis, who had transitioned from sideline commentary to a passionate argument with Jordan about whether the referee had made a correct call, and Caleb, who was already sketching something in his notebook with a snack cracker in his other hand. The park moved around them. Other families, other small athletes, the late afternoon light, doing what late afternoon light does in Atlanta, in the summer golden and heavy, and the kind of light that makes everything it touches look like it's already being remembered. Tae-ryeon stood in the middle of it. He was not at peace. He understood that peace was a long road from here, that there were 3 years minimum of careful work ahead, that the Choi situation was managed, but not resolved, that Seon-hwa was in Korea in a house stripped of her operational authority, trying to decide what she was going to do with the rest of her life, that Park Sung-jin was somewhere counting money and reconsidering his next move, that the Baekryong syndicate was in the early and fragile stages of becoming something different, and that fragile stages broke sometimes. He was not at peace, but he was present. He was at a soccer field in Atlanta, watching his son eat crackers and argue about refereeing with his brother, and his other son was drawing something in a notebook, and his other son was reading a book at a picnic table, with the focus of someone for whom the world's noise had never successfully competed with a good paragraph. And the woman who had built all of this was standing 4 feet away from him, with the easy authority of someone completely at home in her own life. This was real, all of it. He had almost missed it entirely. He had stood at a window while his mother made a phone call and chosen not passively, not innocently, chosen to let that phone call become the architecture of the next 5 years. He was not going to stand at any more windows. Ellis appeared at his elbow. "Do you want a cracker?" Tae-ryeon looked at him. "Yes." Ellis handed him one with the generosity of a person who gives because giving is easy and not because it costs them. "Mom says you're coming to my class thing next week." "What class thing?" "We're doing a presentation about what our families do. For jobs." Ellis looked at him with the calculating brightness of a child who has already identified the strategic value of his information. Jordan's doing soccer coaching. Micah's doing something about books. Caleb's doing architecture even though he's 5 and doesn't know what that means yet. He just likes buildings. He paused. What do you do? Tae-ryeon thought about this. I'm building something, he said. A company. Several companies. What kind? The kind that are going to take a long time and be worth it at the end. Ellis processed this with the pragmatic evaluation of a child who has decided that adults are often vague, and this is probably on purpose. That's not as good as soccer coaching, he said. Probably not, Tae-ryeon agreed. Ellis returned to the cracker situation. Imani drifted back to his side. She'd caught the tail end of the exchange, and her face was doing the almost smile thing that he had started cataloging with the same attention he'd once applied to criminal intelligence, each variation, each context, what it meant. Class presentation, he said. Next Thursday, she said. I wasn't going to tell you until I knew you'd survived this week. Can I come? She looked at him. If you can make it. Tell me the time. She told him the time. He put it in his phone right there, in front of her, so she could see that it was in his phone. She watched him do it. Something moved across her face, small, private, the kind of thing that happens to a person's expression when a gesture is exactly right in a way they hadn't anticipated needing. She looked away before he could catalog which variation it was. The afternoon wound down the way good afternoons do, without announcement, without drama, the light going amber, and then the early suggestion of evening, the families pulling back toward their cars and their weekends, and their own specific versions of ordinary life. They walked back to Imani's house together, all six of them, on the wide sidewalk with the root-buckled pavement, the boys moving in and out of formation around the adults, the way children orbit, close, and then suddenly far, and then close again. At the front door, Tae-ryeon said goodnight to each of them. Micah shook his hand, formal, like a small person who had decided handshakes were the appropriate technology for this relationship at this stage. Ellis told him that the crackers had been good, and he could have more next time. Jordan said, I'm going to score 2 next week. I'll be there, Tae-ryeon said. Caleb looked at him for a long moment. Then he held up the notebook and showed him what he'd been drawing during the game. It was the soccer field, and on the sideline, drawn in careful pencil lines, were 6 figures. 4 small, 1 tall, one that Caleb had given the longest hair. That's us, Caleb said. Tae-ryeon looked at the drawing. He took a breath. Can I have it? He said. Caleb thought about it. He was 5 years old, and this was his notebook, and notebooks were serious. He tore the page out with the careful precision of someone who has strong feelings about clean edges, and he handed it over. You can get a frame, Caleb said. The good kind. With glass. I will, Tae-ryeon said. First thing tomorrow. Caleb nodded, satisfied, and went inside. The door closed. Tae-ryeon stood on the front step with a torn notebook page in his hand, looking at 6 pencil figures on a soccer field, and the evening air moved through the old trees on the street, and everything was quiet in the specific way of a neighborhood at the end of a Saturday when the day has been full. He walked back to his hotel. He was in Atlanta until Monday. He had a flight to Busan Monday evening, 3 days of organizational work. It's a conversation with the 3 remaining lieutenants who needed to understand where the Baekryun syndicate was going and make their decisions about whether they were going there with it. He had a call with his legitimate holdings attorney on Tuesday, a meeting with the financial restructuring team on Wednesday, a flight back to Atlanta on Thursday morning. For Micah's class presentation, he had that in his phone. He sat in his hotel room and propped Caleb's drawing against the lamp on the nightstand because he did not have a frame yet, and the glass would have to wait until morning. But he was not putting it in a bag, and he looked at it for a while in the lamplight. 6 figures, pencil, 5 years old. That was the most accurate portrait of his life that anyone had ever drawn him. He turned off the lamp. He lay in the dark, with the city doing its Atlanta thing outside traffic and heat and the permanent ambient hum of a city that didn't really sleep. And he thought about a 32-year-old woman signing papers at a marble table, picking up a pen because she was not going to beg and not going to break in front of the people who were breaking her, and walking out into Busan rain with everything she was going to need already inside her, just not yet assembled. He thought about what she had built, not the company. The company was extraordinary, and she had done it entirely on her own terms, and he was going to spend whatever time he had being useful to that life, without ever trying to own a piece of it. But beyond the company, the four people she had built, Micah with his handshake and his book and his assessment, Ellis with his crackers and his constitutional arguments and his enormous easy heart, Jordan with his pointing and his tactical mind and the way he held himself straighter when someone he wanted to impress was watching, Caleb with his cities and his notebook in his hand, pressed against his father's jaw in a hotel corridor to verify that something real was really there. She had made all of that from nothing, in her parents' kitchen, while the man who should have been beside her was on the other side of the world, being managed by a lie. He closed his eyes. He was not going to spend the rest of his life in guilt about it. Guilt was a room you could live in, or a room you moved through, and he had decided which one, and the decision was the same decision he had been making for 2 weeks. Every time the weight of it pressed, he was going to keep moving. Because standing still in the middle of what you regret is just another way of choosing it. He was going to fly to Busan on Monday. He was going to do the work. He was going to fly back Thursday. He was going to sit in a small chair in a classroom and watch Ellis explain to his class what his father does. And whatever Ellis said, whether it was accurate or embellished or wildly creative in the way, Ellis tended to approach the truth. He was going to be there to hear it. That was the next thing. And the thing after that was Jordan's game. And the thing after that was Caleb's frame with glass. A sound like in all the next things. The Tae-ryeon syndicate would finish becoming what he was converting it into, and the world he was leaving would finally let him leave it, and the distance between Busan and Atlanta would become less a measure of separation and more a measure of how far he was willing to go in both directions for the people on either end. He didn't know what that looked like in 5 years. He didn't know what Imani would decide, with her time and her measuring instrument and the full honest picture she'd asked for. He didn't know whether the door she'd said was closed would remain closed, or whether time and consistency would change its nature, and he understood finally, without resentment, that it was not his door to open. It was hers. It had always been hers. What he knew was what he had. Tonight, a notebook page propped against a lamp, 6 figures in pencil, one of them his. Outside, Atlanta breathed through the night, and the city's noise was the noise of 10,000 ordinary lives running their ordinary courses. And somewhere 15 minutes away, 4 boys were in beds in a house that their mother had bought when she was still finding her footing, and tomorrow morning, the earliest riser, Jordan, always Jordan, would wake up, and the day would begin. And none of them would know, and not that their father was lying in a hotel room looking at a drawing and deciding who he was going to keep choosing to be. He knew. He was choosing this. Every day from now until it didn't need to be a choice anymore, until it was just what he was. The way a city eventually stops being a place you move to and becomes the place you're from. He was choosing this.